Hello everyone. Welcome back to Britton's Hangout Hour, episode 71. My God, I can't believe we're already here. I am here with Owen Edwards. How you doing, sir?
Hey, yeah, I'm fine. I was saying beforehand that we were working out the time difference, so I could definitely actually be here on time. But I am. Oh, we are here.
Yeah,
So
I know. I was
yes,
I was getting
it's a
kind of
success.
nervous. I was like, oh no, is he gonna like miss something? And I saw you there. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
thank God. But I'm always that way, so
yeah,
it's okay. Don't take it personally.
yeah.
I'm a I'm a I'm
Mm.
a I'm
Thanks
a
for having me.
I'm an anxious little man. I guess I don't know. I'm not very tall. But
Yeah,
yeah, you run a YouTube channel called Owen
I do run a
Edwards,
YouTube channel.
where you talk
Yeah,
about speculative
Owen
fiction
Edwards book reviews. Yeah,
and RPGs on the occasion,
yes,
and comics as well. I
yeah,
saw you like Sandman. I love the Sandman.
yeah, yeah. I no Sam. It wasn't my first experience of comics, but I think Sandman in maybe in the mid noughties, the first two. I read something called 2000 AD, which is where Judge Dredd comes from,
Oh
and that
yeah,
was the
yeah,
first
I know what
adult
that.
comic I read.
I like Judge
But then I
Dredd.
think the first, yeah, yeah, but I think the first real kind of the first adult graphic novels I read were my neighbor lent me Sandman Season of Mists and Judge Dredd Arkham Asylum,
You
both of
mean
which
you
are
mean Batman
classics.
Arkham
And I have read,
Asylum, or did
yeah,
Judge
yeah.
Dredd also
Uh,
have Arkham Asylum?
Sorry, I said Shred Arkham Asylum. I meant Batman Arkham Asylum. There is a Batman versus Dread crossover I've never read. Actually, there's a bunch of those. Sorry, I meant Batman Arkham Asylum by Grant Morrison
Oh yeah,
and
that's
Dave
that's a
McKean.
that's a great comic.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I read that and I read and Season of Mist. I hadn't read any Sandman other than that. I hadn't read volumes 1 to 3. Season of
What?
Mist, I guess, might be the next season, but I just hadn't read them at the time. And I love Season of Mist, and I went back and bought the rest and read them. So I have been rereading Sandman, but now obviously we're waiting for season 2. So I haven't kind of Uh,
Whenever
I
that'll
don't think
come
it's out
out.
yet. Is it out yet? Yeah, whenever it comes out. Yeah.
I thought the adaptation was really good. Um,
Season 1, I thought I was genuinely very impressed. I
I
I
love the
wasn't
ser-
really
they
I
nailed the
adaptation.
serial killer convention. That's one of my favorite parts of the
Yeah,
comics. So I'm like, yes,
yeah.
they did
I
it.
think
They did it, guys.
yeah. Well, given I think the state of adaptations and a lot of modern TV content churn TV, and I'm thinking watch Disney Plus series, that kind of thing, or Netflix or Prime adaptations. The amount that are bad, for me, it's such a high proportion. Whereas, yeah, Sandman, I thought this is actually it's not amazing, but it's really good. I watched Fallout episode 1 last night. That was also good, but like really good
I need
actually.
to I need to watch that. I'm probably gonna start that next week. Um,
Yeah.
I do enjoy the games. New Vegas is my favorite because I guess I'm a
Yes.
normie, but that's a fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
aside from the dated design, which for some reason they gave them only like a year and a half to make the game, so that's kind of why it doesn't look that great.
No.
But the storytelling though is in that game is
Mm.
great. So at
Yeah.
least I thought so. I
Yeah.
don't know
I
how
mean,
many video games
I
you
think
play.
yeah. Well, relatively few now. I play because just time. I play a bit of Hearts of Iron. I played a lot of Subnautica last year, and yeah, I play Lego games sometimes with my kids. But no, Fallout at one point I played a lot of. I got Fallout 3 new at the time when it was out and thought this is great. And then kind of thought there's some clunky things. And then New Vegas, it was gameplay wise and story wise such a big advance and improvement on Fallout 3. And then I went back and played Fallout 1 and 2. So, which
I still
are
need to
great
play
games.
those.
They're very different experiences. Obviously, they're top down isometric, more classic RPG style. More, think anything like Baldur's Gate or Wasteland or something like that. But
I have a hard time with kind of the classic RPG.
mm, yeah,
Maybe because I'm just not at that. I've tried Planescape Torment a few times, and
mm,
I just have a tough time with it because I keep getting stuck. And I
yeah,
don't know. I'm just weird. I like having direction, and like one of the
yeah,
things about Planescape, which is both great and also really not fun, is
yeah,
you can literally just do whatever you want.
yeah. There's not really area gating. I guess it's a bit like that with something like Fallout 3 or
I'll
New
be right back.
Vegas. You can walk anywhere you like, but there's quite strong leads. You're like, you need to go in this direction. You have like on your Pip Boy, there's a map marker. Whereas, yeah, in the 90s, I think you just had a journal that you'd had to go and remind yourself what was happening. Even Morrowind, actually. I played a lot of Morrowind last year, actually, on replay. And on Morrowind, half the time I'm like, I don't actually know where I'm meant to go. I've played this game several times and I'm lost. Whereas Skyrim or Oblivion, it's like, hey, you go in this direction, and this is the next thing.
Oh man, poor Skyrim. If only they had a great story in between that, like
Yeah,
great design. Oh,
yeah.
sad.
It's a good
I
looking
do
game. It's
enjoy
not.
Skyrim though a lot. I just love
It is not
exploring
a
the
game I've
world.
played for a long time. Uh, I liked it at the time. I probably played more Oblivion, actually. Again, Oblivion was the first Elder Scrolls I played, and I played that and the expansions to death. Like I played so much of those games. Um, and so in that sense, like Skyrim, I think I was a bit older in a different phase of life. You know, just when you've moved somewhere or you're doing something, and yeah, I guess I played less games probably. Whereas when I was a teenager at home before university, I think yeah, you know, games are a big part, very big part of my life. Whereas gradually, to different degrees, they faded off. I would play more if I could, in a way, but I just don't have the time, and that's also a blessing because it means I can fill my time with the other stuff I have. You know, reading, family, you know, things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess one of the things I like about your channel is you kind of remind me of Liam a little bit. You know, Liam's Lice.
Yeah, well, yeah, Liam's a friend. Yeah, we've made some videos on Gene Wolfe actually. They're on his channel.
Well, I mean, the point I was making is I like that you are not afraid to cover more unconventional
Mm,
fantasy, and you're not
yeah,
just saying what everyone else is saying. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I like the First Law and Gentleman Bastards a lot, but it's also nice when someone brings up like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Or,
mm,
um,
yeah.
I
Well, I
don't know.
think that's kind of
That's the first one I can think
it's
of. I like
yeah,
all
yeah,
of
no,
them.
well, yeah, indeed. And that, yeah, I've made a few videos about that. Conan as well. For Conan, I think is the most successful video on my channel. For instance, my review of the complete Conan, and I've reviewed Fafhrd. No, definitely,
Oh,
I
Michael
think it's
Moorcock as well. Like I don't hear a
yeah,
lot of.
yeah. I've done lots of Michael Moorcock. I it's kind of where my channel started to some degree. Was I liked D&D and I liked classic sci-fi fantasy. I didn't and don't read loads of new releases. I read some, but again, there's a time preference thing of like I want to just focus on the stuff I kind of expect I'm going to enjoy rather than
Mm-hmm.
test loads of different books. And so I was like, I'll talk about these things. And so yeah, I think I talked about some D&D stuff, and then I also talked about fairly quickly Conan fairly early on, and a few books like that. I think my first book reviews were Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell and John Carter of Mars, two books part of that by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and that's very much what I still read. Is generally stuff that's 30 to 40 years old at least, not always, but it does mean that like a bit like for Liam's channel and a couple of others. I think we've got a smaller audience, but it is more of a dedicated niche. You get really good engagement
Yeah,
from
more
people who
like a
just like
cult
that stuff.
following.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of natural, isn't it?
And
Because
I kind of
if
like the
you're,
cult channels of BookTube, I
yeah,
guess, like Raph or
yeah,
Liam or you, because I mean, I like some. I'm not a snob or anything. And also I'm friends with
yeah,
some of the bigger YouTubers,
yeah,
but
absolutely, yeah,
but
yeah,
I guess it's because my also I'm not a very sexy channel either. I mean, I don't cover just one genre.
mm,
you
yeah,
know, like I covered Blood
yeah.
Meridian with a friend of mine, and like it barely got any views, even though I was very proud of that video.
Yeah. I'll be reading
That's the
Blood
exact copy
Meridian.
I own. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Except it's old
um,
and
I'll
beat up.
I'll be reading Blood Meridian maybe later this month. I've been reading westerns recently. I'm rereading The Dark Tower. That is my current priority book. I'm only rereading The Gunslinger, but the Dark Tower is great. So yeah, classic westerns like I reviewed Rise of the Purple Sage recently. But I accept one thing. This is, I mean, I'm sure this is your attitude. You kind of, if you're making stuff you want to make, then getting 30 views on it and knowing that about because you look at the analytics and like 15 people have actually watched it, that's okay. Like that feels good because I've got to talk about something with a tiny audience, but they want to know. And then you have other videos which are bigger, and that's good too. But like you can, it doesn't matter. Like if you value the content you make, then the fact you have a tiny audience for that one video doesn't matter. It's okay. And I think that releases you from the performance pressure, which you can sometimes tell really good bigger channels, people who run really good bigger channels, you can tell they sometimes talk like, I feel like I can't make this video because the algorithm, or I feel like I've got to do this.
Yeah, I
But
don't want to
actually,
do
yeah,
that. Like
yeah,
my
yeah,
mom. Or actually, hold on. Let me turn on this little thing she gave me. Which let me forgot to turn this on before show. There we go. I don't
yeah.
know if you can tell, but it's this little light ball here.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, there's a bit more light going there, yeah.
Anyway, she's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
you might be able to like monetize soon." I'm like, "Don't you get that at like 1,000? I don't think." And I mean, hey, my mom. I don't want to tell her she's wrong because she goes like, "I've lived longer than you." She'll do the old, I made you in this world. I'm gonna take you out of it, or something like that.
Yeah. Hey, you got to honor your mother and father. It's a good principle, even when they are wrong about YouTube. uh,
Well,
but
I
yeah,
mean they are trying to help, so I
yeah,
appreciate that.
exactly, exactly.
Also,
Yeah. Oh no, it took me 17, 16 months to. I know, sorry, more than that. It took me like just over 2 years to monetize. So my channel is monetized, but the amount, like, it's pretty marginally monetized. It's a small amount of money, um, and that's fine as well. But I'm like, yeah, if they're going to put ads on it anyway, I might as well benefit. I don't feel like Google own the advertising they're putting on my channel. I'll take the money off them, but it's such a small amount. Until you're big, like, virtually no one is doing this for a job,
I mean,
and
I'm
most
not.
people, you know,
Well, that's the thing.
you know,
Like, I'm not like anti-establishment or anything. It's just like I
yeah,
want, just like, hey, there's stuff these bigger YouTubers
yeah.
aren't talking about. I want to talk about them.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing is because you're doing it as basically, if it's a hobby in that sense. It's something like, I care about this, I'm going to do it. Not, oh, I hope I could be successful. And I think it just sets you up for success in a way. It sounds funny because you're like, yeah, but you're on my channels. We're not big channels, and there are much bigger channels as well. Really good channels and bad channels, frankly, as well. But the whole point is, if you're doing something you enjoy, the audience matters less. You're happy doing your thing.
mm-hmm.
And that it does mean that, yeah, you find people who don't really want to talk about Joe Abercrombie and the Poppy War and
I like Joe
whatever
Abercrombie though,
else.
so I
Yeah,
mean,
I I I like I
I'm not a complete anti-establishment,
yeah
rebel.
yeah yeah yeah. No, I enjoyed the first Lord trilogy. I haven't read anything else. I one day will. I've read the first. You mentioned it, First Gentleman Bastards book. I enjoyed that. I haven't actually bought the second one yet. I will eventually. Um, you know, I like A Song of Ice and Fire. Hey, rumors about book six.
Yeah, I've just
Are
given up
floating
on
around.
that.
Yeah, I gave up ages ago. Then there are now meaningful rumors for the first time in years. But I
I actually
remember.
was rereading some bits
Yeah,
of A Song of Ice
mm,
and Fire not too long ago, and I'm like, damn, this is really good. Like I was rereading the bits
yeah,
where Jamie's basically trying to settle everyone down after the War of the Five Kings is over, and he kind of muses
yeah,
to himself like, hey, maybe I can actually do this, and he realizes that being a like doing good things actually feels good,
yeah.
and he's like,
Yeah,
oh.
it's natural to it. It's our natural end. Yeah, it's our natural end to be good. And that's something which, yeah, obviously that's one of the discussions in A Song of Ice and Fire is about, because they're not morally great books in my opinion. They're not going to grim in the sense of like they're all nihilistic. Good is good. It's just that you've got to be clever and good if you want to survive. Because if you're good and
Well, the
stupid,
world
you
isn't a
die.
fun place in A Song of Ice and
Yeah, yeah,
Fire, but I do
yeah,
agree with you. I do think it's.
yeah.
I mean, it's not Joe Abercrombie story where it's just like,
Mm,
oh, everything's shitty.
yeah, yeah. No, indeed. I think my view of the first law wasn't that it was like super nihilistic. Actually, I still thought there was stuff like you were meant to like certain characters, you were meant to want them
Well,
to
yeah.
succeed. But the end result of lots of stuff was just, oh, it's all miserable. Whereas A Song of Ice and Fire actually has a more moral arc to its results. Let's say,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think the fact that the first law, I forget his name. I'm afraid the general, the kind of the good general who has to hang out with that moron prince, and the fact like, oh yeah, he's won the day, he saved the empire, the union. He's oh no, he's now got typhus and he dies. Okay,
Oh, are you talking about
right.
West? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Basically,
it.
he gets
And
like
that,
magical radiation poisoning and
yeah,
dies. Like, yeah, that sucked.
yeah, and
That's
that's the thing where
sad.
like that's
It's like,
something, there's a
dang
sort
it.
of aesthetic there which I just don't vibe with. I enjoy the book. I'm not like I didn't hate it. It's also okay for characters you like to die. I was like, okay, whatever. Whereas Song of Ice and Fire, is generally not like that. There are obvious things set up, obvious results to them. Ned dies because he won't play a game. Rob dies because he won't honour agreements. Whereas when I remember it being a thing where people were like, "Oh, is Davos dead?" And I was like, "Davos isn't dead because there's no reason for him to be dead. There's no narrative purpose for Davos to be dead. He's going to be alive." And then you're like, "Yeah, yeah, the next book he's alive." Um, you can tell. Whereas I think Joe Abercrombie is more like, "Hey, maybe West will just die from magical radiation," like you say. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
he's definitely
thanks, Joe.
more about. I mean, George explores how
Hmm.
the world is unfair. There's a lot of angst about how
Hmm.
the world is unfair
Hmm.
in The Song
Yeah,
and Ice and Fire. There is
yeah, there
some
is. Yeah,
angst in Joe Abercrombie as well, but he's more
I think
like
so. Yeah,
this just happens, like
yeah, yeah.
nothing really you
There's a
can do
slightly
about it.
colder view. Yeah. I think it's interesting, both of them, but particularly Joe Abercrombie, and I'm thinking in terms of explicit influence, Abercrombie really credits David Gemmell with being an influence on him, and he's won Dave Gemmell awards. I'm not sure if he's like, "Oh, I've won these awards," and yeah, and so,
I
but
haven't
I
I
think
haven't
he
read
talks about
David
having read
Gemmell,
it.
unfortunately.
You ought to. I mean, we now call it classic fantasy. I mean, it's the first his first book was 1981 or something, so it's over 40 years old. It's in that bracket. Gemmell's a great writer. Yeah, I remember when I'm trying to remember. I think I did Fafford, but when Dom his Books Great Channel asked me to do a bit for one of his videos on like, oh, recommend a classic fantasy. I recommended Fafford and the Grey Mouser. He expected to recommend Legend because he knows how important that book is to me. Gemmell has a really interesting thing where he says that if it wasn't basically for his, he loved westerns. He wanted to write Louis L'Amour style westerns, but he said if it wasn't for like his faith and his values, he would have ended up with these very nihilistic books. And that's something that his cancer battle changed his life and stuff. Lots of stuff going on there. But he instead writes stories which are often full of lots of characters you like die. They're not cheerful in the sense like lots of sad things happen, but they are
Mm.
ones where like they do answer that kind of thing where I'm like, I read Abercrombie 40 years later and I'm like, your worry and your question is answered by David Gemmell. Like it's interesting that Gemmell is grappling with the same questions but offers a more guardedly positive answer. Um, you know, that death and sacrifice and the difficulties and sadness of life can be given meaning and purpose. Whereas I think, yeah, Abercrombie's more like, yeah, magical radiation.
Poor West. Though I don't think he
Mm,
like rebels in it. He's just
yeah.
like, oh,
No,
poor guy. He just was unlucky,
yeah, yeah. Oh, no, and I think we're not. Yeah, we're not meant to think. That's the thing is, if he was truly, say, nihilistic and amoral, and you'd be like, no, why would you wouldn't like West, and you wouldn't be sad about him dying. You wouldn't be sympathetic about the fact the prince is a moron. You just wouldn't care. You'd hate them all. And the same like with Baze, you'd be like, oh, Baze is just a guy who's doing what he wants to do. Whereas actually, like, no, Baze is a bad guy.
Yeah, no, it's kind of
Yeah,
interesting. Like like Baez, sort of like
yeah,
at first
Baez, yeah, sorry.
you're kind of like I was kind of like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, he seems like an interesting guy.
Yeah,
And then like the third book, I'm like, I hate this man's guts.
yeah. Oh, yeah, literally, like this person is the worst person. But
I think
that's an
what also
achievement.
made
That's
me
really
hate him more is
yeah.
there's nothing you can do. You're just like,
Yeah.
dang it.
Oh, no.
Ugh.
If Joe Abercrombie's statement is almost, look, it would good is good and evil is evil, but the problem is that evil is often in charge and you can't do anything about it. That's for me a lot of what Last Argument of Kings is saying is that, and I mean sometimes that feels like it's true, doesn't it? So I can I see why it resonates with people. Like I'm more of a Tolkien general kind of person myself.
Mm.
Tolkien, I mean Lord of the Rings, I think is the greatest fantasy novel of all. And that's not a rare opinion, but I think it is the greatest fantasy novel of all. And I think it deals with so many of these things, doesn't it? Of like, why does it feel like evil is triumphant, and you know, things like that. And I reread it a couple of years ago for I think the fourth time, and I like it more every time I read it.
It's funny you mentioned that. I have seen you done reviews for other old fantasy stories. Like
Mm.
I have it here, The Broken Sword. I haven't read this yet. I've
Mm.
wanted to for a long
Great book.
time.
You ought to.
Um,
Great book.
Michael Moorcock really likes it, and I got the 1954 version, and Moorcock says that's the superior one. So I'm very glad because um, that would have been a big suck if I got it and it was the revised edition. But
Yeah. The differences are in the end fairly small, but yeah. No, Moorcock's interesting for that. I think it's funny that for Moorcock, he loves the Broken Sword and he hates Tolkien, and he kind of calmed down a bit. He's calmed down a bit in the last few years, but for Tolkien, his problem with Tolkien is moral, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And without going to go into the weeds on that, I think it's funny that partly he's like, yeah, compared to the Broken Sword, which is like this really deep and dark story that's really epic, and actually Tolkien has a story very similar, based on the same sources as the Broken Sword. Like he has Turin, the Narnian Húrin, the Tale of the Children of Húrin. And in it, Turin is the Kalevala, is this Finnish saga, the Kalevala, which they both draw influence from. They both have dark swords, which Stormbringer also, obviously, like I said, Elric Stormbringer draws on. And it's funny, I wonder if Moorcock has read that or whatever. It wasn't published during Tolkien's lifetime. It posthumous edited by his son. But yeah, it's Tolkien could write a lot of different things. I think it's just that Moorcock liked that kind of the more angsty and fatalistic and doomed approach that you could read into the Broken Sword.
So you would be more of a First Law fan than a
yeah. I feel
a
like
Lando
he would.
Sando fan. I don't know. Though
Yeah,
apparently you like
exactly. Yeah, it does say that's pretty interesting. I don't know. I think he might find First Law a bit too grimy because you think about his heroes, all these kind of fantastic, angsty, knightly heroes who go on eternal epic quests, and they're all personalities of the Eternal Champion. Whereas West dies of magical radiation. Elric doesn't die of magical radiation at the end of the first book.
That's true.
So I wonder whether he might find it almost frustrating there. But I think you're right in terms of the kind of in terms of the moral
Maybe you
aesthetic.
would like Game of Thrones because there's a lot of angst in Game of Thrones.
I think so. I'm not sure if you'd admit it. Michael Moorcock is a kind of provocateur. He loves saying stuff to kind of wind people up. And I think,
Oh
but I
wow,
think
really?
definitely,
Oh man.
yeah.
I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
You have
suspected it
noticed,
after reading Epic Poo.
Yeah. No, it's something. Epic Poo is obviously at least 50% all wind up. It has a serious point he's trying to make. It's at least 50% just him declaring that he hates the fantasy establishment and he wants to make something different. And to be fair, lots of times where people are saying stuff about Lord of the Rings, particularly that they don't like, they're kind of talking about that. They're trying to do that, aren't they? They're saying, I think some people don't like some stuff in Lord of the Rings, but I mean, you can tell lots of people pushing back against Lord of the Rings. It's really because they are pushing back against what they perceive as old-fashioned. Yeah, which is not my take on Lord of the Rings, but stuff like, it's not very well written compared to Robin Hobb, and I'm like, it's not better written than Robin Hobb. It's not a serious discussion. But I like Robin Hobb too, but like, it's just that I prefer this modern style, and Lord of the Rings has a style that I bounce off. It's Planescape Torment, versus Skyrim.
Yeah, no, I don't know if you've watched like Matt's book reviews, but like I've seen some of his reviews. And don't be wrong, I have nothing against Matt's book reviews. I think he's very talented at what he does, and I mean, again, I wish I could just take off my little microphone, my little headset, and just go off and express myself as eloquently as he could. But
there's very talented people.
Yeah, but I think his takes on like Lord of the Rings, like his Conan review was particularly hard to watch for me because it was such the quintessential like modern take on like obnoxiously modern take on Conan I've ever seen. But I'm like, I couldn't really comment because it's like, God, a lot of my complaints would just be subjective stuff. Like I don't know if really
I like this, you don't like this. It's stuff. I think Conan's interesting. My Conan video, I haven't watched Matt's review. I'll have to go and watch that. Conan and a few of those other classic writers are interesting because you can tell what they run into is what people expect from these books and and not that it's wrong to have your own expectations, but they sometimes run into what people are expecting from them, or people have very fine sensitivities. And I'm thinking with Conan, like my video gets comments that are both people saying that I'm a massive snowflake because I raise the racist in Howard, versus people saying they can't believe that I'm reading such racist evil trash that's also badly written. That's also, and like both of these are, you've got to just back up a bit, right?
Howard's not even that bad. Like I've heard some of the later volume. I mean, I got the Del Rey versions of Conan, which are great. They're all
Mm.
Howard's words, untouched. So yeah, recommend
Yeah,
those always. But
absolutely, 100%.
like I heard it does get a little more racist. I don't know what I mean. I don't know what that means. I mean, there is racist stuff in Conan. I'm not gonna
Mm.
deny it. I mean, it was written in the 30s, and this guy was from Texas.
Yeah,
I mean, like, come on.
yeah.
But
I think
I think Howard's
there's
a smart
different.
enough writer though, where it's
Mm,
not him. It's not like HP Lovecraft, where he's just positing his racist neuroses on
mm,
everyone.
yeah. I think that there's different things going on for Lovecraft and Howard in how they write about race, and both have things. Hey, this is as it were personal perspective, but certainly I said with Conan was a problem is that Howard obviously in some of his books just finds the idea of black people scary. I'm not joking. I mean, like, literally, he just says, "Look at this black person, that's scary." And I'm like, I don't find that scary, so I find the whole thing very strange and unconvincing when it does that. But it's not often. Whereas I think it's so for him, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it gets worse. I'd say probably actually fades out a bit. Whereas I think for Lovecraft, he's a clever writer in his own way. He does have these deep neuroses which really inform stuff like
Well,
Innsmouth
I think you
and
kind
stuff
of
about
have to in some ways
yeah,
if you're a
yeah,
horror writer. I mean,
yeah,
I've
yeah,
thought about making like an epic poo type of video or thing
mm,
about
yeah,
Lovecraft just to piss off
yeah,
all the Lovecraft fans, but
yeah,
like I'm
yeah.
like, is it gonna be worth it though? Like,
No. Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of Lovecraft. I
I like some of his
think,
stuff, but
yeah, yeah,
I don't think he's. I have issues with. I mean, not. I mean,
yeah,
it's not really as racist. Like, I mean, I was just talking about Howard. Like, I mean, it's not really like
yeah.
reading
You can
about
cope with that.
racism
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't offend me, but
Mm,
yeah,
mm.
I don't know if Lovecraft's that good. I don't like his prose styling for
Yeah.
one, but
He has an incredibly ornate prose style. Much
vivid
compared to Howard.
imagination though. I
Yeah,
do love
yeah,
the
yeah,
Cthulhu
yeah,
mythos though. Like I love all the creatures and
yeah,
monsters and it's weird. It's weird.
yeah.
I should just
And well, and
call
definitely,
my complicate it's Facebook complicated as
yeah,
people
yeah.
might say.
You and HP Lovecraft. I definitely try if you haven't read the Dream Quest of Kadath, his big Dreamlands story. I'd read that as well. Uh, I'm a big fan. He's not my. I don't know if he's my top five or top 10 even. But and horror isn't in many all respects my thing. Like it's weird because he's sort of sci-fi horror, so I guess I'm more on the sci-fi side than the horror side.
Oh,
I don't read
Lovecraft was
much
his own like
horror. Yeah,
because like he was. I mean, he said it himself. Like where I've written my Dunsany stories, I've written my Poe stories. Where are my Lovecraft stories?
yeah,
So like he acknowledged
yeah,
he was
indeed.
ripping off people.
Yeah, he was doing a lot of different things and just putting a lot of stuff out there. I mean, Howard does the same in terms of genre, but
Oh yeah.
Howard has a very like once he settles into it, Howard has a very particular style. And I mean, certainly for Conan, after the first few books, some of which are really good. Tower of the Elephant is one of my favorite Conan stories. After that, there is this very specific Conan vibe, all the way up to the posthumous stuff, but up to Beyond the Black River and Hour of the Dragon, the last two big Conan stories, which are both great. And yeah, I think probably Howard is the bigger accomplishment. Probably Lovecraft has lasted longer due to the imagination, due to the fact that people are
hmm
like, "Wow, that's creepy and scary,"
Well, I mean,
and so the
unless you're a
Cthulhu mythos.
fantasy like
Yeah,
fan, I think people
yeah,
acknowledge Howard's impact if in the
yeah,
fantasy field
absolutely,
anyway. Well,
yeah,
which is also kind of a disappointment I've seen with a lot of um booktubers like, "Oh man,
yeah,
Tolkien." And I'm like,
yeah,
"Yes, but there's a lot more." Like
yeah,
you're forgetting about Robert E. Howard. Like Robert E. Howard is one of the like
yeah,
him and Tolkien are like I mean, I know there's other people out there people could name, but like they're like the big two. I made a video about this
yeah.
recently.
Yeah, I think the other early name to add to in fantasy. I mean, obviously, as we say, Lovecraft is a weird genre spanning one, but in terms of fantasy, the other one I would really add is Edgar Rice Burroughs, probably. That because Burroughs is in many ways the first. He's the first kind of mass popular American pulp sci-fi fantasy writer. Obviously, you have H.G. Wells before that in terms of like your founders of fantasy and sci-fi. But like I think Burroughs with John Carter of Mars and Tarzan and stuff and is big too. Um, I think yeah, Howard is an advance probably on Burroughs in terms of like he's really intense, whereas Burroughs a lot of it is like Burroughs is great fun, and it's not dated in the way that people might say it is. But
I
apart
like
from the books, they're
Burroughs,
slightly
the
Nazi.
stuff I read. I remember I
There was
remember
the
I was
Venus
kind of
book where he's like, Nazism is good, and then later he's like, by the way, Nazism it's bad, and you're like, yeah, good. I'm glad you realised that.
yeah, in the movie, I don't know if you saw the John Carter movie, but it wasn't
Yeah,
bad. It was actually pretty
it
good.
was better. I would have watched the sequel. We enjoyed the Disney John Carter of Mars. It was just a classic thing, a bit like I think it broke even or just about. It just wasn't successful enough, and it's a bit like the Master and Commander problem of like, oh, what? And that's a great film, by the way. But it's what happens when a film is good. You could make sequels, but just the studio is like, there's not enough profit on the first one. It's not a flop, but it's not quite successful enough. And I think that was John Carter of Mars was it was just not quite successful
And
enough.
there were
I
also a
enjoyed
lot
it.
of people who were like, "This looks like Star Wars," and I'm all like, "Bro, that's
Yeah,
what inspired. That's one of the things that
yeah,
inspired Star Wars.
yeah,
What are you talking
yeah,
about?" But no, I
yeah.
mean,
Well, exactly. I mean, George Lucas is was. I mean, I don't know if George Lucas hasn't made a film for 20 years and
yeah, he's
a proper film,
after the
but he was a
prequels, he
very
just kind of dipped out.
yeah.
He's like, "Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm good."
he helped Dave. He wrote a bunch of stuff that set up the Clone Wars, the series. That was the stuff he worked with Dave Filoni on. But yeah, he basically hasn't. He clocked out. I think probably partly disappointment, partly frustration. But yeah, the point is that back in the 70s, he's really cine literate, and also book literate, and so American Graffiti or the original trilogy are really full of different things in his background, like things he's interested in, like Kurosawa and John Carter of Mars, and the Magnificent Seven, things like that. Like lots of and
Dune,
Magnificent Seven, of course, is lots of things that he's interested in.
Joseph
Um,
Campbell as well.
yeah, Joseph. Well, the eternal hero, and the kind of hero's journey. So all these different influences on it. Which I mean, you don't. My kids enjoy Star Wars without knowing that. I enjoyed Star Wars when I first watched it without knowing it.
Mm.
But they are cleverer, deeper films than you realize, perhaps, when you first watch them. And even the prequels are a bit like that. I should say the prequels have stuff they're trying to do. They're not awful. They're trying to do stuff that's interesting. They've got interesting ideas. They're just not executed well.
Mm.
This is a difference bluntly between the prequels and the sequels is the sequels at their best are kind of just popcorn stuff, and at their worst are much worse. Whereas the prequels are kind of like, I can see you're trying to do something. You're not succeeding, but you are trying.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of why. You know, you know what? I'm not jumping down the Star Wars rabbit hole. That's for another time. I'm not. Nope.
Yeah.
Put my foot
Whole
down.
different video. Whole different video. Yeah.
Put my foot down. There was one episode
Yeah.
I did with T from an erudite adventure.
Tony's great. Yeah.
That was
Great
a
channel.
fun episode, except the audio was really bad. So yeah, except until like the halfway point. Um, but yeah, no, T's a great guy. And the whole half we were talking about Star Wars.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. It's an interesting one actually. Like in terms of that issue of what I call the member berry kind of, I don't know, the member berry culture of making stuff, and even Fallout counts for this. We talk about Fallout at the top of the program, but that there's member berries is like is a South Park joke about, there's these like berries who like just tell you things you're nostalgic about and they make you happy,
oh
and it
yeah.
turns out some of the things you're nostalgic about are bad. Remember Chewbacca, as one of them says, like people love Star Wars, right? So let's make more Star Wars. Let's make people love superheroes, even though it's not even that older, a modern kind of hobby.
Mm-hmm.
But so all this stuff is just constantly going back to the well of like we must get more stuff. Oh, people like fantasy, so I guess we'll get The Witcher. We don't really like The Witcher, so we'll ruin the property and all the stuff. Just this constant grind of we have to have content, and it has to be stuff people kind of think they remember or that is like stuff they remember. And yeah, I think a lot of what's happened with Star Wars and with Marvel can really go. You can sum up to do with that. That's you almost don't need to discuss it. So much of it is to do with like how can you get people to come and spend money based on properties because they just remember that property from like 20 years ago. And I think that's kind of my advanced view on Star Wars. I guess without needing any detail.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. It's a good way to
Yeah,
put it, really.
yeah,
Um, though going back to Lovecraft, if I remember right,
yeah.
I think I think Moorcock also ranted about Lovecraft once as well.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Michael Moorcock, I think if you gave him one of his early books, he might now not remember it. He'd read it and be like, "I'm going to write an article about how much this guy annoys me." He, as we said, he's a provocateur, and I think he's really articulate at summing up not necessarily a correct criticism, but a kind of convincing criticism.
Mm.
I think that's one of his skills. I'm not sure if it's a critical skill or not, but it is like a skill that he's able to say. Epic Pooh is a good example. I just don't agree with it, but like he's like, oh yeah, sure, come on, all these twee hobbits, come on, are you really convinced this is the kind of story you want? And it's kind of covering up all the real problems that go on, and it's just glossing over stuff. And you get people, obviously, you occasionally get people saying similar things like, oh, there's not enough stuff about what about the taxation in Gondor? Was that George Martin? Was something like that recently? And you're like,
I
I
think he
think I
was
did,
being a little ironic when he
yeah,
was saying
yeah,
that. I don't
yeah,
know if he was being serious when he said that.
yeah,
I've
yeah. But I saw some good responses actually being like, actually, you can work out the taxation policy in South Gondor. But I think you can tell that sometimes it's like it's a meme thing. You pick out something; it doesn't need to be true, but as long as it's just got that kind of degree of memorableness, it picks out like something that is a bit weird when you don't know the whole context. Why didn't they get the eagles to drop off the ring, as an example? And you could find that with,
thing that's been
you could get.
bugging all Tolkien fans for the past 70 years. Why
Yeah,
didn't they just get
yeah.
the Eagles to fly them over there?
Yeah. But you can pick out something, and obviously there are answers to lots of these things or whatever. But it's just something where if you can get the meme right, then it sticks. And you could do that about like we've got it in magical radiation. Man, good job, West. Have some magical radiation. You can just pick out this kind of like if you want to sum up a weird thing in not weird, but like a
Oh,
thing in Joe
whoops.
Abercrombie.
Jamie
Yeah,
lost your hand. Oh, no.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Just hey Theon, you know what you lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can sum up the meme, and it doesn't actually mean it's a fair criticism. Like we said at the start, Abercrombie and Martin both are much more moral storytellers than people give them credit for. But like the meme is, oh, it's all just disgusting and gross.
Robert
Yeah,
Heinlein is a victim of this.
yeah,
I don't know if you've read much Heinlein, but man,
yeah,
he's such a victim of
yeah,
that. Like people are like, "Oh, he's a fascist." I'm like, "Oh, have you
yeah,
read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress?" But then again,
yeah.
he's
Oh,
just weird. He's a weird
yeah,
guy.
yeah. I think there's a lot of that in terms of people
Rocking.
react. Yeah, people reacting to stuff that sometimes secondhand. A big thing. How much the Starship Troopers discussion is secondhand. Most people haven't watched the film or read the book. They're just
Exactly. Yeah.
debating. They're debating Robert Heinlein being a fascist without having looked at either. You find that, say, Gene Wolfe, who's obviously a big author. I talk about, and Liam, you mentioned earlier, big fan of as well. And it's something you sometimes find that people will have read a bit and be like, "Isn't yeah?" Or they've heard about it. Isn't he weird about women? And you're like, "This is much more complex, and we've got to go." The answer is no, but like you suddenly realize you're running into an opposition over an author, and I think George R. R. Martin isn't just full of sex and violence. And you're like, no, actually, it's not. But yeah, you've sometimes got to push past that in getting to a proper conversation, and I do think that's one thing in terms of BookTube, and not the kind of channels we've talked about that probably we both follow, but there are channels out there, millions of channels, where you can see a lot of the reaction, or lots of blogs, or lots of stuff on Reddit, where a lot of it is this surface level, meme level response of like, Heinlein was a fascist, Tolkien, what about the Eagles? George R. R. Martin is just about rape, and you're like,
That's the ticket to success. We're gonna make a
yeah,
video and we're just gonna start
yeah,
shooting out a bunch of random statements like
yeah,
Heinlein was fascist. And what about the
yeah,
Eagles, Tolkien? And like
yeah.
10,000
Different camera
views.
angles. Yeah. You spin your chair around to the camera two to say the second inane view, and people are like, yeah, this is what I want.
Yeah.
And I think people react to that. I think if you're like, it's there was a what was the
People
I'm
like
trying to remember
spiciness.
the
What can I say?
yeah, exactly. It's
Why do you think Epic
it's
Pooh
basically
is so big? Like, why do you think
yeah, exactly.
Epic Pooh is such a phenomenon? People like spice.
Yeah. Yeah, and you get this kind of it's the listicle thing as well, like 10 ways in which Spirited Away hasn't aged well. People now understand that mocking pigs for eating too much is fattest, and you're
He's
like, oh,
fat.
I made that example up. But you can just imagine this kind of thing
Never
where
heard
someone's
that in
like,
my
Spirited
life.
Away has aged badly, and you're like, Spirited Away has No, it hasn't.
I
But
like that's
we
I've
feed into it.
never heard that in my life. Oh, that's
No, that
funny.
I made that up, but I
Oh, you made
predict
that up.
Poe's law within a year there'll be an article saying that.
Oh my god, that
uh,
would be great.
yeah, it just is going to happen. But it's I think this is a big
You're
thing
gonna
that
be
goes
asking
on.
for the royalties.
Yeah. I'll be like, that was my idea. But I think the outrage machine, the fact we take part in it, by the fact we respond, and we're so frustrated, and by the fact that people are stupid
I
and
think it's
saying
just
stupid
because I
things.
think it's like
Yeah,
literary criticism's gone
yeah,
bad, kind of.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's always been outrage and there's always been grumpiness in literary criticism, but certainly the the kind of mass media allows all these kind of debates to happen simultaneously and all the time. And it seems same with D&D. You can find the same 10 opinions about D&D or whatever else, being constantly repeated. And I think either you play whack-a-mole and you constantly argue, or you try to make something positive. He's an agricultural theorist, so bit of a sidetrack, but agricultural theorist who was big on the idea that called Mollison, who was depressed about conservation in Australia. He's like, I'm so depressed about stuff, and then he just basically disappeared for a couple of years. And he said, left until I could come back with something positive to say. And the idea that you could come up with a better way of kind of uh, doing conservation and agriculture together, things like that. And that's been a massive influence on me, is this idea that you want to come back with something positive. And yeah, a bit of criticism is fun. Sometimes a bit of pushback is fun. But one reason why do I talk about why do I do reviews as well? Why don't I do lots of kind of like big topic videos, even though reviews people don't watch reviews? It's because I just want to talk about what I thought about the book. I'd rather do something positive than be like, what is the spicy topic, or what is the kind of big topic I could talk about today? Um, you know, of course, if I want to do that, I could be like, why One Piece is the worst anime slash manga ever.
I'm
If I wanted to really get some spice.
oh man, yeah, like do you read a lot of manga? Do you read a lot of manga?
Um,
Have you
a,
read any manga?
a small amount, but not very much. Like I've read some Naruto and a few other bits like that, but I don't at all pretend, to have any
Oh,
expertise.
okay.
I have enjoyed watching some animes over time, but not really. I'm not an anime person really beyond Studio Ghibli. I read a lot of, in terms of non-English language comics, I read a lot of um, kind of Tintin and Asterix and other French comics, but
You read
usually in English.
Moebius?
But like, yeah, yes, I've talked about Mobius's Edena, World of Edena, on the channel, which is very good.
I'll have to check that
Yeah,
video out.
yeah,
I deeply love Jean Girard as an artist.
yeah, yeah. No, he's a great artist and a storyteller too, like a talented storyteller. So yeah, in terms of my foreign comics, I'm waiting for the Yoko Tsuno and Blake and Mortimer live actions, multi-million-pound adaptations of obscure French
What are
comics.
the French comics called? The like Benny. It's not Benny Gesserit.
Band
That's
Dessinet, the Benny Gesserit. Yeah, fear is the mind killer, they say. But no, the Band Dessinet,
yeah. It's
BDs. Yeah,
the
yeah,
French comics or their
yeah,
propaganda.
exactly. Yeah, the ones that are programming you to prepare for the French quiz at Haderach. Yeah,
No,
but yeah,
but
no, exactly. Band Dessinet. But yeah, which are great, and it's the main ones people know in Britain at least are Asterix and Tintin, and there was a good Tintin movie a few years ago, a
oh yeah, I
decent
remember
Tintin
seeing
movie.
that with my
Yeah,
grandmother.
yeah, yeah. It's good. It's not amazing, but it's good. But of course, there's just no with things like The Witcher or One Piece. You have these massive inbuilt audiences. Like you either have the game audience or you have the manga anime audience, and so you're like and the same with remaking Avatar: The Last Airbender, the most totally unnecessary thing I
I
think you can
know.
imagine.
Oh my god.
But
I mean,
I haven't watched it.
it
Maybe
wasn't
it's great. I don't, but I doubt
It
it.
wasn't the Shyamalan movie, but I guess that's not really
Yeah,
saying much. It was like a well
yeah,
made live action summary of the show. Made me want to
yeah.
watch the original again.
I don't know if there's a critical drinker video or someone else, but making the point that we have this thing where sometimes I think you're saying Ghostbusters 2023 isn't as bad as Ghostbusters 2019 or whatever, or 2017, but that's not praise. Like it's a weird thing where we're like, he says it's better than the two recent Ghostbuster films, but it's still bad. But we end up being like, man, it's better than those other two films, and that kind of inures us to how bad it is. And I think it might be the same with the Avatar live action. I've not seen it, so I'm not criticizing it, but you can imagine people might be like, yeah, it's quite good because they're like, it's better than the film. As you say,
Yeah,
it's an
it's
okay. If it might be an okay live action summary, but I just don't. It's not necessary. But it has an audience, and so of course you can make that. The Witcher has an audience, so of course you can make it. You don't even need to like it. You know,
they
you
got a
don't have.
great song out of it, out of
Yeah,
the show.
yeah. Oh
So
yes. Oh yeah. Give it to Coin to Witcher. It's good. I watched the first 2 seasons or so, I think, of
I
that, and
watched the
then I
first
think
season. I watched the beginning of the second
yeah,
season, and I just got burned out on Witcher content because
yeah,
I played the Witcher video game. I really liked it,
mm,
and
yeah.
man, that episode with Tormund was really good though.
Mm.
Anyway,
It had some good stuff. Cavill was very good. I've not read the Witcher books. I played a bit of the first Witcher game, like Witcher One. I've not played the other two. Um, you know, I'm not attracted to the Witcher books. Not that they sound terrible, but when people say what they think about them or what's good or bad, I'm like, yeah, maybe one day. You know, there are
they're
lots of books to
also
read.
it's also like it's kind of I don't. It's not really a rip off of Elric. It kind of is
Mm.
because like it's the style or well.
I know some people would say that. I
It's
hear
like
that
if
view.
Neil Gaiman wrote Elric in a like
Yeah,
Slavic setting. Is
yeah.
how I would describe it.
Which sounds kind of fun. Obviously, you know that's the appeal. But and I like the idea of the Slavic myth as a background. And but yeah, I maybe one day, but it's just not. You know, as I say, that when you realise when you're like, oh, I say you think you can read 20 novels a year or 50 novels a year, whatever. You know, people read very different amounts. That's how many you can read, and there are so many books that are worth your time, particularly if you're reading a series. If you're only reading kind of classic pre 20th century books and you can read 30 of them, great. But if you're reading a series, you've got Wheel of Time and it's 14 books, and you've got um, Chronicles of Amber, and that is technically short books, but 20 short books or 4 very big
I thought they
books.
were
You know
10.
what I mean? Like the second Chronicles of Amber is another 10.
Oh,
So yeah,
you know,
that's what I mean. Do you know
Zelazny
what
is
I mean?
one of
Like,
those I've wanted to try
yeah,
for a long time. Well, I've thought about trying A Night in Lonesome October, but people were like, "Yeah,
yeah.
it's too meta." I'm like, "Well, it sounds cool. I want to read it. Don't stop me.
There's
I don't like
yeah,
being told what to
there's
do."
I mean, maybe people give good advice sometimes, but I think you're right that I think a good instinct is like I don't know if you're this line. I doubt this line is very American, but the bit of advice as a sick child. If I was hungry enough to want some cheese on toast or something, I'd be like, yeah, I could have that. I don't want dinner, but I want some cheese on toast. Is my mum will say now, a little bit of what you fancy does you good. And I think if you think a book sounds interesting, give it a go. I guess you might bounce off it. Don't whine if you bounce, but it's a good. If you find something interesting, just go and read it. I read Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson last year and loved it, and I should really read Diamond Age next because that's another big book people say is really good. But his Baroque trilogy, even though they're like big 700-page books, which are quasi historical, quasi sci-fi, I'm like, yeah. And people are like, yeah, they're really obscure and weird. And I'm like, yep, sounds good. Let's go. uh,
I
so
mean, you've covered the King of Elfland's Daughter I saw, which I've also wanted
yeah,
to read, and you've covered the Broken Sword. You seem very comfortable with covering niche topics. So
yeah, yeah. And if I don't like it, it'll be fine. That's fine. It might just be not for me. What is the book? It's actually no. In terms of watching, sorry, this is a TV reference, but John from Cincinnati was David Milk, the guy who made Deadwood. After that, he made John from Cincinnati, which was technically meant to replace The Sopranos, which was a bizarre decision. But I read reviews as I'm watching episode by episode. I read reviews from the time from 2009 or whatever it was, and people are like, "Oh, this is baffling. I don't get it," or "This, I don't understand why this character does this." And I'm like, "This is amazing. This is so strange." And I recognize that for me, I just have a very high tolerance for that, whereas I think most normal people are like, maybe not. So I
oh, and
recognize that
that
maybe I'm
show he
more
made
tolerant
about
of this.
horses.
He did make that. Yeah, that was the one that was cancelled because too many horses died.
Oh no!
So I'm not laughing at the horse death, but just the fact is like, guys, I think they did 2 seasons. They're like, there's some horses that have died. We need to not make this anymore because. Can you imagine the conversation, David? We're cancelling your show. Why? Is the viewing bad? No, it's the dead horses that keep dying. No, John from
I
Cincinnati is.
I've
It's a surfing. Sorry, go for it.
I was about to say I've only seen I've only seen Deadwood from David
Yeah,
Milch. So
yeah. NYPD Blue he co-created with Stephen Bochco, and it's an interesting show. NYPD Blue never really becomes what it wants to be. I think it's kind of a forerunner for other things. But Deadwood is a great show, and it is the show it wants to be. But yeah, John from Cincinnati is there's a kind of surfing dynasty in California, but with massive dysfunction, and there's loads of other weird stuff in this town, and everyone's a bit broken and weird. And then a guy turns up who obviously can perform miracles, and weird stuff starts happening. So it's kind of magical realist. But this guy who turns up, maybe he's God, or maybe he's an angel, or maybe he's just a something. But he gets stuff going, like and it's just this weird, strange series that is very, very off the wall. And I like that kind of stuff. I don't know. Say you're saying about Zelazny. I don't know about the book you mentioned. I haven't actually read that. And hey, if you want to read it sometime, I'd be up for it. I'll join you. But Lord of Light, Chronicles of Amber, short stories. He's a very good writer, and I one thing about reading classic stuff is you realize there's good stuff that people don't talk about, and it's very not spoken about at all. And you think, that suggests that our current taste is not always right, because this is so good, objectively, I think, stylistically, structurally, but it's just been forgotten. Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter Miller, sorry, for instance, is another example. Or I'm a big fan of Lois McMaster Bujold, record nominee for the Hugos. And though I've seen a few big booktubers start to talk about her, for about 20 years, as far as I can tell, she just disappeared from being discussed especially and in BookTuber in the last 10 years. No one knows about her. And you're like, she's a living author who still writes books, record nominee, 3-time winner, but just no one has read or talked about her. And you're like, that's strange. Lois McMaster Bujold.
Oh.
So Vorkosigan Saga, World of Five Gods, her big two. Very good author. But you just realize, what is currently being talked about is not necessarily what is the best stuff out there. And it's one reason to do that kind of deep dive into the classics is you realize there might be other stuff out there that's more worth your time than the latest 3-book series about, and it's a 3-book series about an Asian setting, but it's grimdark. There are at least 3 or 4 series like that right now, right?
I have one
you probably don't need to
Jade, the Jade series or whatever that's called.
No, I do too. I would say Jade City.
Cool.
That sounds interesting. Jade City sounds pretty interesting. Poppy War, not so much. But I'm sure they're both, whatever. I'm not saying they're bad, by the way. My point here is not to criticize books I haven't read.
Oh,
but,
yeah, I gathered that. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's more this reaction where you're like, that sounds interesting, but it's weird. There's all these books about this, but you're like, no one has read Roger Zelazny, apparently.
Have you watched Matt on just Books? He's talked about Zelazny a little bit.
Yeah. Obviously, and I think that's like we talked about, that kind of cult niche section of BookTube is definitely where I'm more likely to spend my time. And I've got a few friends who read a lot of modern stuff, or and maybe more into that cycle, like Andrew's Wizardly Reads, or someone like Dominish who's really into self-pub stuff.
Yeah, all this stuff is interesting about it. Into the self-pub. I'm actually reading my friend Joe Burns', which is weird because I'm not used to superhero novels because I'm often used to reading them in comic books. But Wistful Ascending, it's pretty good actually. It's a lot better than I anticipated, which I thought I'd have a good time with it, but it's actually good. It's good stuff in there.
Superheroes. I'm not sure. I was once read. A friend forcibly read like 5 chapters to start Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson to me and another friend, and there's a sort of in joke now of just like the idea that a guy walks in and starts reading Brandon Sanderson to you. It sounded okay. I haven't read Steelheart since. I have it on Kindle because I got it free one time. I think it's like his, when Brandon Sanderson did like, I'm doing a free book every day this week or something.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I got like a couple of his books there. I got Skyward as well, I think. I haven't read either of them. I don't know when I will. But anyway, the point was that I haven't read any superhero novels like that. But I love superhero. I've read lots of superhero comics. I enjoy that. All-Star Superman, maybe my favorite graphic novel.
I was actually. That's funny you mentioned that. I was actually I was bickering with a friend of mine about All-Star Superman the other day because he was kind of like,
you for or against?
I'm like, I love All-Star Superman. I'm not even a big Superman fan, but I love that comic so much.
Have you watched Superman the animated series? Because it's got a very similar vibe in some respects, not every respect, but some respects.
Long time ago, I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of that Tim Meany, Burnett verse.
The DC animated universe.
I love that. It's been a long time though.
But I think for me, Superman works as a character best when he is a paragon of good. He is a and in All Star, the idea is literally he's a star god almost. He gets sets up by getting cancer that even he can't beat or cure because he's gone into the middle of the sun basically to save people. Um, but he's a good guy. He's not a bad guy. There's
Mm-hmm.
no weird angst, and that's obviously a big thing Morrison responds to. Is he's like angsty Superman is lame, but you want a kind of a Superman who represents something good, and I think that's something where obviously different superheroes are different, but I like
And
these kind of
also,
takes that really drill down to the heart.
oh, sorry. Finish what you were gonna say.
No, no, I just said the heart of a character. I want a superhero because there's so many interpretations of any given superhero, and I don't really want another weird angsty twist unless it's Batman. I want to drill down into what really makes that character that character.
Yeah, I know. It. Oh man, Zack Snyder, he made his Superman
Yeah,
movie, and I've had people I know who are like, "Hey, shouldn't Superman struggle? He's not Christopher Reeve. He can't just like wink and smile all the time." I'm like, he can still be a good guy, like a nice
yeah,
paragon of. He can still struggle while being a paragon of virtue. Not everyone has
yeah,
to be an angsty sour. If you want Batman to be an angsty sourpuss, you can get away with that because that's kind of who he is. But
yeah. Oh no, I
I
think
hate this idea that
definitely, yeah,
darker is better. I
yeah.
mean, I
Well,
like
and
darker stuff, but just I
it
don't
can
like
be,
the
yeah.
idea that it's inherently a better form of storytelling.
I agree, and I'd say I liked Henry Cavill as Superman. I respect his performance. I had some praise for the DC whatever it was, extended universe DCU, the Snyderverse. I was a very almost unique defender as far as I can tell of BVS. I was like BVS has an obvious aesthetic and artistic vision that like you can follow and you can track, and there are really good things about it. But at the same time, I think at least one thing that tripped up Zack Snyder and it got him into trouble with the studio, even though the studio wasn't generally right or smart, but was that he just couldn't ever kind of work out how to balance some of these, like the idea that Superman could be good and also have challenges. He had to make him angsty, and I think that's whereas Batfleck, Ben Affleck as an older, grumpy Batman, that was great. Whereas I think no one needed that from Superman.
Oh, he
Um,
was like
and
murdering people, and that just
yeah,
rubbed
yeah,
me the wrong way. Now I know I can hear it now. The people are like, "Oh, what about the Tim Burton Batman?" And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't give a
yeah,
shit. Okay, like I don't
yeah.
like that he killed people in those movies either. All right, I mean,
I
I think he was a
it's
good
fascinating.
interpretation, even though
Yeah,
he was killing people. I just don't like that
yeah.
he was killing people.
Well, I think it's we've mentioned it, but
Also,
like
him
I think it's
killing people is nonsensical because he still hasn't killed the Joker. So it's
oh
just
yeah,
like,
why not kill the Joker? The Joker's the guy you have to kill, right? Because he's actually evil. But I think it's interesting. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, partly because the network tells them to, and in that sense, we should be thankful for the network. Like initially, I think it's Fox at first, isn't it, and then later WB. But is the fact they're told you need to make a sequel, an animated sequel to Batman '92. So the reason there's no Catwoman origin, there's no Penguin origin, there's no, that, and there's no like Joker origin or whatever, is because they've already been in the films. They're in the first two Burton films, and the animated series is a sequel to that. And in fact, it's the animated sequel series making Mr. Freeze good, is why they make that dreadful Arnie film. Um, but that it's interesting that they don't make him anywhere near as kind of like he doesn't kill people. He's actually a lot more standardly heroic in the animated series, isn't he? And I like that.
I mean,
Um,
he's still brooding and has a bunch of
yeah, he is brooding. Yeah,
issues, but
yeah,
like he's
Mask of the
still a good
Phantasm,
guy.
one of the best Batman films, is all about how broody he is. Yeah, I like another really good Batman adaptation, I think, or interpretation. We're talking about what drills down, and it's not. I don't know that I love loads of his later comics. I like 1603 or whatever it is, but Neil Gaiman's Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader
Oh yeah, fantastic.
is a good, and I wouldn't want to read that every time.
It did.
Whereas I could read a yeah.
I do wish that Gaiman did a. I would have loved to see him do a run on Thor, but I also would have loved to see him
Mm,
do a run on Batman. I think he would have done really well on that. But
yeah.
once he
But
did
again,
Sandman and started writing novels, that kind of just took off.
yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
ah.
Well, I think that's the thing is that he ended up. Sandman is more or less how he gets started. He does a few things before that, but obviously he starts writing Sandman around just the end of the '80s, start of the '90s. It's a secondary character on a tertiary character on a tertiary line, and it's massive. It's a massive hit. It hits the zeitgeist, And he's never really like he doesn't really write that much now comparatively. He writes kid stuff occasionally, and that's valid, but it's very different. But he really is his real peak is this period where he's writing 55 issues of this weird book that is just his, and then he writes a few good novels after that. But I'm not sure. Yeah, he never really he's never gone back to do a run on something. He just does limited series. Um, and maybe that's a shame. But as you say,
He did do Marvel 1608, which I thought was fun.
yes, yeah. I know. I enjoyed that too. Whichever the year date was, I did enjoy that. As that was limited though. That's a 6 issue, isn't it? So
Mm-hmm.
very DC style actually. But I whatever happened to Cape Crusader was what was really good about it for me was that it actually recognised the thing that is most interesting about Batman is not that he's angsty. That is a kind of thing that follows from Batman. You know, like if you just think Batman's cool because, well, he is cool because he has a cloak. But if he's just cool because he's angsty and broody and that's the kind of superhero you like, is that really he is this kind of he's the perfect self-sacrificial hero. He's a hero who has lost what lost so much. A bit like he is the flip side of Superman. It's meant to be like that. It is a kind of a fascinating thing that those two characters were made by the same company around the same time within a year or whatever of each other, 2 years of each other, and they are both so they're connected, they're flip sides. And I think for Batman, this idea, the reward. What's your reward for being Batman? Well, you get to be Batman. Like the reward isn't the happy ending, but it's that you get to be the hero. You get to always face down darkness, and make darkness scared.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
yeah
and also Zack Snyder's kind of a dummy because like
yeah
he's just kept doubling down instead of just being like, you know what, maybe that was maybe I made a few mistakes in some places. Maybe I went a little
yeah
too far in some places, to quote George
yeah
Lucas. Um,
yeah.
and
Well, no, indeed, I think that's the
he's all
thing. Is
like, oh yeah, Batman. You know, people view him as this like, he should have some struggles. Well, maybe you should have done that without him killing
yeah
people.
yeah.
Did you ever
Well,
think of
yeah.
that? He's
Well,
a
I think it's that
dumbass.
he just obviously is like, yeah, the solution to these things is to make these characters dark, and that was, I think it's a similar thing to the idea. It's a parallel. It's different, but it's a parallel to the fact that Marvel make every character wisecracking. What we really need from all characters all the time is loads of wisecracks and jokes, and just it being a constant kind of like no character is ever serious, nothing ever matters, and it's a weird kind of flip side, isn't it? And the same, the same with Star Wars. The idea like Rey always has to not to go back to Star Wars too much, but Rey always has to be proving herself that she's clever and better than everyone else. And you're like, people don't need this. People don't feel validated by those stories. People don't really personally identify with those. Like that's just you've. It's a cliche,
It's a
and it's actually
balance,
not worked.
people.
Yeah. So yeah, Batman should struggle, but it should be internal to his character. There's some really basic storytelling things there that actually, again, go into what's gone wrong with kind of a lot of modern TV and film media, the memberberry media, is you don't have internal character stakes. You don't have anything in the plot that matters. It's just like people like this property. We'll just write some jokes or we'll have some angst, and that'll probably work, right? The reason people like Avatar, as in by that I mean the James Cameron stuff, which is kind of weird and dumb,
Oh
is because
God.
like this guy just loves these. But no, he just loves these films. He's like, man, I've got this crazy idea. Look, gigantic water world. We're gonna have dolphins flying. We're gonna have this. We're gonna have this. We're gonna have this. He loves it, and people resonate with that. I think. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's much more valid because people care. He cares about the project he's making,
Well, I
and
suppose that's
it's
good.
even though it's not very good.
Still
Yeah,
sucks,
yeah.
but you know.
Oh no, I'm not saying I'm liking it, but I think people do like it and seem to actually like it, and you're like, great, isn't it better if people like this weird original property that the creator actually loves, rather than like, yeah, let's just go to the Captain Marvel 17 Marvelicious, uh, you know, yeah,
Marvelicious.
I
Oh
like
man.
that one where she opened the ice cream van. You know, it's better for people to spend their money on one than the other, I think, and it is probably this kind of does touch some of our book points. Is to be fair, like I think if you're finding stuff that the author values and is putting time into, it doesn't matter where it's come from. It's going to have something valuable to say to you. But certainly, one reason to maybe not have that recency bias, not always read only the latest stuff, is because you can maybe escape from the cycle of being tricked by marketing into thinking this is the next most important book ever. It won't be. It won't be.
It's like
But yeah,
the most blurbiest thing
Yeah.
ever. You just see on the top of the book, most important book ever written. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, that's when I write my novel, that will be what the blurb is. Um, I will get J.R.R. Tolkien to blurb it as
Okay.
the most important book ever.
You're gonna time travel. Probably gonna
Yeah, yeah,
hate it though. He's kind of.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, he was very grumpy. He really did like a lot of books, but he was also exceptionally grumpy. Like, and when he didn't get something, he was just like, "This is awful." Narnia, he just didn't get. Narnia was great. Like, there's a lot of artistry, a lot of creative
Well,
stuff going
he
on.
also mentioned he didn't like allegory, and if I remember
Yeah,
right, he thought Lewis was being a little too obvious with it. He's like, dude,
yeah,
ugh.
yeah. Well, but I think this is where Lewis, I think, just found it probably realized this was amusing. There's this whole thing, a book by a guy called Michael Ward from the early noughties, Planet Narnia, academic book, but basically about what's going on in Lewis. Why is there such weird stuff in Narnia? Why, if it's just that you can track each of these things onto one Christian idea, it should be easy, right? But you can't. And basically, he realized, and it's something where all the Narnia scholars were like, "Nah, that can't be true," until they read the book and they're like, "Oh no, it is true." Is that Lewis was basing the seven books, probably, this is the theory, on the seven medieval planets, and each book is heavily informed by the themes of that planet. And so, why is Father Christmas in Narnia, and why is it about winter passing and new life coming? It's because it's based on the king returning. It's Jupiter, the royal planet, and Father Christmas is this rubicund, jolly, gift-giving figure who comes to represent the king, who is also meant to be rubicund, jolly, and gift-giving. And this is such a kind of weird thing, that this crazy theory, just which should be just, oh, that's a weird fan theory, like Tom Bombadil is this or this, is like, no, it just probably is true. Lewis basically ran a prank on us for 50 years. He just didn't tell anyone. There's a couple of hints in his letters, and there's lots of hints in his earlier work. In a poem called "The Planets," in the Planetary Trilogy, particularly that Hideous Strength, his sci-fi novels. But yeah, he just didn't tell anyone, and I think he just thought it was funny because medieval allegory and these kind of deep, multi-layered things that aren't just that you translate one item into another item, like, oh, Aslan is Jesus, but things have many meanings, but also they're just their own story, and a lot of this stuff is based on kind of weird esoteric stuff. That's very Lewis. It's what his academic work was all about, and I think Tolkien just didn't get that, so he just thought, why is Father Christmas in this book? Father Christmas sucks. Like, I think that was literally Tolkien's kind of mindset, where whereas Lewis is like, nah, it's fun because he smiles a lot and he's got presents. Like Lewis just thought it was a
Apparently,
kind
he
of
didn't like
fun
Dune
Easter
much
egg.
either. I didn't
No,
really care for Dune.
was this Jess of the Shire video? This is where I literally never knew he said this, but that he said in a letter, from what he's literally says, from what I read, I don't like it much. Which was, as far as I can tell, his entire opinion was, from what I read, I didn't like it much. But it's not really a Tolkien kind of book, is it? Even though it kind of is sci-fi Tolkien. Um, like it's yeah, it's written in a very, very aggressive style. I love Dune, a big Dune fan, but written in a very aggressive style, and it's kind of got some very sort of intense thoughts about human destiny. Literally, that's what the books are about, right? They're all about the fact that we inevitably end up in these massive human movements, um, and that everyone is crushed underneath it is a big part of what those books are about.
Yeah, I mean,
Paul has to start a jihad because in the end, someone's going to.
I guess my um, Tolkien kind of reminds me of Harold Bloom, like a very
Mm.
brilliant guy at what he did, but kind of snobbish.
Well, I don't.
I'm telling you, I think he would
Yeah.
hate a majority of fantasy novels being written today.
Oh yeah. No, he would. He would. I think probably a bit of snobbery. Also, I wouldn't. Tolkien was not a crank. And by crank, I mean someone who's actually nuts. But he, in a
Well,
sense,
I
he was
don't think he's a
cranky.
crank.
But yeah, but he's cranky. He just has these things
Oh,
where it's like, oh, I don't like that. Like
oh,
he
you mean like
reads.
he's like a grump? Okay, I
Yeah,
hear
that's
you.
what I mean. He reads Narnia and he's like, oh, Father Christmas. And then with June, I do think he would have a philosophical disagreement with June, though. That he does think that there are these big things that you can't avoid: the doom of the elves, the doom of the Noldor. The Noldor commit a great sin in the kinslaying. They're exiled to Middle Earth. They exile themselves, in fact, to Middle Earth. They could turn back and repent. They don't. That creates this doom of the Noldor. That is, everything they try to do will just turn to dust. That is a big thing, but that doesn't mean that there aren't great deeds done by Noldor elves in between. In the same way that, like, it's a famous line from the movie, obviously from the book though. But when he's like, "I wish Tolkien," oh sorry, I wish Gollum was dead. This idea, like that, no, actually, you you don't know why all these things are happening. You're trapped in them in a sense, but you can only do the best you can do. And so the hobbits change the destiny of the world, whereas for in Dune, nothing changes destiny. Like eventually, there's going to be a guy who the next stage of the human experience has to happen, and there's going to be Paul is a victim. Paul realizes he's trapped because he can see all these futures and stuff. He's trapped, increasingly trapped in doing this, and that's a massive theme. Is this tragedy of and also just the inevitability of human, existence. Whereas Tolkien is much more like, yes, things are tragic, but you can do good. And I think Herbert is a lot more like, yes, you're going to be crushed beneath the wheels of history.
That's an interesting
So
way of
yeah,
putting that.
so yeah, I do think Tolkien would dislike if he read it all the way to the end, he'd dislike it because of that, if nothing else. And that's a substantive criticism, right? In the same way that if you read First Law, he'd be like, "Nah, magical radiation." You know,
He's like, wait a minute, nukes
it,
don't work like that.
yeah, but I think he would respond to it not just because he's a grump, which he was, but also because he'd have these philosophical disagreements with, like, he doesn't think it's true, and maybe that's the sign of his kind of grumpiness that he. Whereas I can read those books, and be like, yeah, I can read books that I disagree with, and be like, yeah, I get that, I like that, I enjoy that. I can read Elric and enjoy it, even though I'm very much not where Moorcock is. But you know,
Yeah, I was like, yeah, he's kind of a he was kind of a snob a little bit.
yeah,
Kind of
yeah,
a
I
yeah, he
think,
was a bit grumpy though. He liked this classic mythology
mm,
and
yeah,
but yeah, I'm just, I mean I think he wouldn't really like a lot of the fantasy novels being written today. He'd
no.
probably think it's crap.
No, I don't know. It'd be interesting to. I don't know if you'd have liked Gene Wolfe. Wolfe was greatly influenced by Tolkien, of course. But like, I'm trying to think. Apart from someone like Wolfe, or maybe Guy Gavriel Kay, an obvious example because was associated with the Tolkien estate. I haven't read. I'm going to read some Guy Gavriel Kay this year, but I'm not sure what fantasy Tolkien would like now, or if you. I don't think all these kind of slightly grim, sexy, violent books would get him. I think he'd hate them. Uh,
He did like
I don't know
Conan
what he would like.
apparently.
Yeah, yeah, no, that deservedly, Conan's great. I wonder. You know what? I think he wouldn't have liked Harry Potter, but I think he would have seen the point of Harry Potter a lot more because he'd been like, "Look, these are the first four at least. These are kids' books, and they have these kind of like there is a sense that there is a moral universe involved, and the characters are not despicable." I think, yeah, I don't think he would like to turn towards despicable characters. The main character is really dark and twisted. Um,
So he probably wouldn't
which,
like Game of Thrones.
well, I think he would read it. And to be fair, I think he'd get why Ned Stark died. He would not disagree with that. He'd be like, yeah, Ned Stark died because of and the same with Rob. But I think probably having to spend lots of time in the head of weird, nasty characters wouldn't be his favorite thing, I think. Um, But then again, it's not mine necessarily. I don't know which book it was, but there was some, and it wasn't First Law actually, but there was some book I read in the last couple of years where I was like, I don't really want to read from this character's perspective. I hate them. Like they're an awful person, and I don't want to hear their awful thoughts. Which, to be fair, was not what I thought with the First Law trilogy. Like the whole point is you like Logan, particularly in terms of Logan is a guy who has a psychopathic demonic possession thing going on, but you also kind of like him because that's something he's trying to escape, but he can't escape. It's part of the tragedy of how Abercrombie writes stuff. Um, yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I literally cannot think of a single kind of very recent modern fantasy that Tolkien would definitely like.
I mean, I don't know. I really
maybe
don't know.
maybe he would. Maybe he could live with Brandon Sanderson.
I haven't. I you know. Here's like I feel bad as a fantasy fan for saying this. I haven't read Sanderson yet because
I wouldn't worry about it.
I mean, it's just I have some. It's kind of weird. I mean, I haven't read him, but I have some opinions. I don't really love his view on like magic.
Mm. Do you mean his kind of highly scientific view, like magic should
Yeah,
work in this? Yeah, yeah. Obviously, that is not though they're categories
I
that are
like the
useful to
magic to feel
describe.
mystical, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. I'm not massively like. They're useful terms. Hard magic, soft magic are useful for describing stuff. But I think where some people are like, oh, I'm just only into hard magic systems. I think no. If my favorite book is Lord of the Rings, if I love, you know, Chronicles of Amber or Narnia or Gemmel's books, that none of that is hard magic, and I don't really miss that it's hard magic. I think it's interesting and it's kind of fun. It's great for the kind of fandom to theorize about. You know, hard magic is one of those things that makes Sanderson's books easy to theorize about because you're like, ooh, well, how would this work in this situation, or where does this come from? And that's fun. People like that, but that's kind of a secondary thing for me. I think for Sanderson, I like Sanderson. I think I read Elantris and was like, this is okay, and then a bit later, and I think I might have read some of the Mistborn books, but yeah, I eventually just read through a lot of his stuff and have really enjoyed it. I don't think he's a must see. I don't think many authors nowadays are must see. Most authors over time are forgotten. You know, I don't read most authors who are publishing in the 70s or the 50s.
Well, you read
Sanderson is
Paul
really
Anderson
important.
and
Yeah, exactly. I read Paul Anderson and Roger Zelazny, you know, that kind of thing. And Robert E. Howard. And it's selective. The process of time is selective, and what is good eventually lasts. You know, you can go back there and find that it's got a lot of people who like it, who are smart. It's won the right kind of awards that you can respect, not bad award, not the modern Hugos, let's say. Um, whereas I think Sanderson is good, and he's better than a lot of very popular fantasy authors. When I look at Hugo lists, I'm like, nah, Sanderson's better than those people in some cases. But he's not
again,
amazing.
that's
He's just
probably not
good.
saying very much, but I
No,
haven't read a
well, no,
lot of
well,
her books
bluntly,
either.
yes. That's the point. Is half the Hugo list I look at. I'm like, I at one point I read a bunch of Hugo winners over covering. I've read most of the Hugo winners from the 80s through to the 10s. I'm like, there's definitely periods where like just this stuff is bad, and that's more pointed later on. Like the first, have you read any of the Broken Earth books by N.K. Jemisin?
No, I do have oh damn it. Fuck.
The
Fifth
first one.
season. I have the fifth season.
Yeah.
Haven't
So
read it
fifth
yet.
season is good. Fifth season, I thought was really good. And that one, the Hugo, and I'm like, yeah, I get that. Then the second and the third one, the Hugo too, and I'm like, they're not very good. They're very mediocre, and the only reason they could win is due to the hype train. And so Sanson is better than a lot of these books, but he's not amazing. And I think he does some stuff really intelligently. He works hard, and that is much to be appreciated. He writes, but
You
it's
won't
not
be
like,
getting
yeah,
complaints about where the next books, which
yeah,
you know.
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Like I find what makes fantasy so um what makes it work, I guess, is that it's like, hey, look at the magic of the world, not necessarily literal magic, but you know, like you're in a different
Yeah,
place, you know. Like I don't
mm,
like it to be explained.
yeah. I know.
If it's
I
explained, I
understand that.
feel like I'm
Yeah,
in like a biology lesson or something. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't want to deal with
Yeah,
that.
I think it's interesting. You see with Tolkien that obviously Tolkien runs both games. He doesn't explain his magic away, partly because remember, magic is either basically it's either divine magic or it's biological magic of the elves. Elves have some sort of inherent ability to do certain kinds of magic, or it's dark magic. That's all you need to know. In a sense, there are things you can then work out from that. It is quite logical, but he doesn't give science, does he? He's not like, oh, this is how this would work, or attack does this. But he does care about how stuff works, but he also understands that stories don't have to have lots of that stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like he writes about why things are like they are. That's why we have so much stuff that's published after his death, because he filled up a library full of just ideas and discussions that he wrote to himself. He would write stuff like their entire really important essays to explain that are really interesting to us. He wrote just so that he could understand why these words were like they were. It's very strange, but for him, he really cared about that. But he understood in the rings, he understands that it's way more cool at first glance. It is a good way to get introduced to hear, you know, Gil-galad was an elven king of him the harpers sadly sing, or to hear Aragorn sing about Beren and Luthien, who you do not know about other than occasional offhand references in the Lord of the Rings. And you're like, I want to know about it. And it gives you an interest in that ancient stuff, but you don't need to know about it. The same with, you know, like you hear about drowned Numenor. So it's valuable to have that. but the story shouldn't be like, by the way, let me explain all the history, let me have all these things, you know. And I think Sanderson may fall into that a bit too much of telling us too much at once, giving us too many things, because that's just what he's getting it on the page. And yeah, I don't I like Sanderson. I follow him. I haven't got the most recent secret novel, just as like I can't afford another big leather bound at this point.
I also know you
But
like Gene Wolfe.
I do, yeah.
I've read one book from him called The Land Across. Didn't like it,
N-
but
Not a book I've read, so I can't. It's a late Wolf, and Land Across is one of a few of the later books that sometimes get mixed reviews. So I can't comment on the book itself, but you wouldn't be the only person who didn't like it.
But
But I
I
I
have
will.
wanted to try him again. I do have the Wizard Knight over
Mm,
there. Liam
yeah.
and T were gonna read it together, and I'm like, hey, could I join in? I kind of don't want to
Mm.
read this book by myself. And they're
Yeah.
like, cool. So hopefully
Yeah.
we'll do that. I love the copy I got. I love the cover art on it, but I don't want to pull
Yeah.
it out right now. But
No,
I'd like to
Wizard
try him
Knight is good.
again.
It's not a bad place to start. It's not a short book, as in it is two medium length books stuck together. So I'd certainly, uh, it's not, but it's definitely one of the places you could start with. I'm gonna do a video soon about like where to start with Gene Wolfe. You can start with his short stories. That's one place. Fifth Head of Cerberus, which I recently finished a buddy read of, which is a great book. Um, Book of the New Sun, which is his most famous work, but is long and is very heavily stylized. Like it is a challenging read in some ways. It's not impossible. The books you like have prepared you well. That's one thing. Is I think imagine someone who's only read, you know, Brandon Sanderson, R.F. Kuang, Joe Abercrombie, is then like, oh yeah, here, just perfectly good authors, I'm
I'd
sure, but like,
probably ease them in. I'd probably be like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
if you like Joe, maybe you'll like Fafhrd the
yeah,
Grey Mouser. I mean, it's a
exactly,
little
yeah.
lighter
Imagine being
than
like,
First Law, but they're very digestible.
exactly. Imagine saying the next thing you should read is like, oh, by the way, here's Gene Wolfe, or like, oh, you're interested in Tolkien? Okay, read the essays first. It is like sometimes you gotta build up the knowledge, and if you've read classics, then Wolfe
Or
becomes easier to
here's
understand.
Elric. Maybe you'll like Elric.
Yeah,
It's weirder, but
exactly. Yeah, it's Elric is easy to read in the sense they're short books, they're easy to understand what's going on, and then you just build up your ability to read because there's a big thing. Reading is an ability, a muscle that has to be trained, and I think Gene Wolfe is. He is a pro athlete level of
though I
demanding
have to
you
say, I guess
read.
I shouldn't be too
Yeah.
intimidated. I'm reading Jonathan Strange and Mister Norrell right now.
Yep.
I just started that. I'm only
Yep.
like 100
Great
something
book.
pages
Really good
in.
book. Yeah. Really good book.
I'm digging it so far. There's a lot of wild
That's
stuff
good.
going on. So like he's making statues
Yeah.
talk, and
Yeah.
it's pretty funny at points. Um,
Yeah. And
uh,
and and it's a book that kind of doesn't handhold you. It's just like here's a weird world. Get used to it. It's I like
a
that
lot
book a
of
lot.
footnotes. Oh
It's
my
due.
god.
Yeah. Yeah. It's due a reread. I enjoyed it when I read it. There's some other short stories in the world I need to read. I haven't read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which
Oh, I read it
was a
last
great.
year. I thought it was very good.
Yeah, I no doubt it is. It sounds very good, but it was one of those things where I was like, okay, it's a BookTube darling, which means it's either really good or it's crap. It doesn't mean anything. Loads of people are talking about it, but I think it sounded good because here's actually another thing in terms of thinking about that is I realize I just watch channels where I know what the person thinks, even if I don't always agree with them, and I understand their taste, and then I know what to think when they've said what they think about it. I'm like, okay,
Yeah, it
I
kind of
know,
becomes
where,
boring after a while. You're just like, no.
yeah, yeah. You want to watch a couple of people who you actually know what they think, and then otherwise, yeah, I there's just so much content otherwise. But Piranesi obviously very successful. Lots of people liked it, and sounds interesting. And I do like her as an author, Susanna Clarke.
I mean, I
So
liked it.
yeah, yeah,
If that means anything
yeah.
to you.
Well, yeah. Well, it's what in wine tasting you'd call palate alignment. Is if people have a similar palate to yours, they like similar stuff, and they say, oh yeah, you'd really like David Drake, Hammer Slammers, then you can be like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I would. Whereas obviously, if the person's like, oh, I only like brand modern books that involve like these kinds of themes or deal with these kinds of political ideas, and you're like, I don't really care, I don't want to read that. And then they say, but you have to read this. You just know you've got a good chance the new book they recommend will not be your taste at all either. Um, so yeah, uh, but yeah, no, I will read Piranesi at some point. I think it's it's on the list
I
because it
mean,
does
it's
sound good.
shorter. I mean,
Yeah,
the only reason I started Piranesi before Jonathan Strange is because it was
yeah,
shorter.
because it's short. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a sensible policy. Is one my point about Wolf actually. There was I was like, I think Wizard Knight is a good place to start, and if you're reading it with people, Liam knows it and knows his Wolf, and T is obviously a great guy to read with. And we're reading Unfinished Tales by Tolkien together at the moment. Actually, is our current buddy read on my Discord. But the reason I wouldn't automatically recommend that or Book of the New Sun is because I'd be like, they're quite long, and if someone's just going to get confused, they're going to get miserable. They're going to be like, this is 800 pages or 1,000 pages, you know. And the same there, that if you are 20 pages into Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell and you're like, I don't get it, you could start being a bit depressed about the length.
I mean, I'm
Um,
not yet. I'm digging it so
yeah.
far.
Oh
I'm
no,
nervous.
good.
I'm
No,
not
but
gonna
that's what I
like
mean.
it, but I'm liking it.
No, but
So
that's what I mean. It's sensible to start. Like I understand why you started with Piranesi. That's what I mean. Is you can at least say it's not that long till I finish it. Occasionally, I think I was reading. It's the same with Moorcock or with Joe R. Lansdale's Dead Man's Road. I recently read, uh,
oh,
horror
I love
western.
Lansdale. He's great.
So what I realized was I liked some of the stories in that. I didn't like some of the stories, but I was like, look, they're not that long. I'm just going to finish it. I'm not going to be
Well, I
like,
mean,
if they,
that's
yeah,
the thing about
you know,
short story collections, man. Like
yeah,
it's or
yeah,
anthologies. Like dude, it's like
yeah,
flipping a coin. You know, like
yeah.
some of them are gonna be. I don't know if you like noir very much, but I really enjoy Happen Leonard from Joe R. Lansdale.
Mm. Yeah,
Who's like
I've heard of it. I've not read, as in I've heard of it in the context of Jar Land, so I haven't read it.
I also read The Thicket from him last year, which is a western.
Mm.
I like that a lot too. So
Yeah, I think I'd say what I liked, the things I liked in Dead Man's Road were the ones, not necessarily. Like I think I just found some of them a bit grimy and gruesome into like in a way that seemed to me to have that sort of nihilistic vein, essentially a kind of pornographic vein, functioning just this kind of like, oh, okay, don't. But actually, I didn't. He had some very good action. He had a very good imagination. I love the monsters in Dead Man's Road. Um, so as in the things he came up with for each story, and so yeah, I would be cautious about reading more Lansdale, but if Happen Leonard and The Thicket are good, I'd be willing to have a look at them. Yeah, the noir influence books that I have been reading are the L.A. Quartet by
ooh,
James
I've only read
Ellsworth.
I'm actually gonna read Black Dahlia this summer because I
Mm,
haven't read
yeah,
that. I've only read L.A. Confidential because I like the movie.
yeah. I actually have the movie. I think it's behind me. I watched it a couple of years ago, maybe last year.
I'm surprised they
Um,
managed to make it because like Elroy, he likes to go off.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. What from what I gathered is at the time he was like, yeah, it's really good film. I really enjoyed what they're doing, seeing stuff. And then like 10 years later, was like, I actually thought it was awful, or at least it's nothing to do with my book. It is. It's a very good adaptation of LA Confidential. It's a very good adaptation of it. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. The Black Dahlia film I heard was okay, but not amazing. I haven't seen it. I read them in order. So I watched LA Confidential, then I went back and read Black Dahlia, the Big Nowhere or whatever it's called. Then LA Confidential. I'm currently reading White Jazz, um, which is the final one. And then he does have then a set of connected books which go from just LA to the whole of America, which I don't own. But no, they are wonderful books. They are at points a bit gruesome. By that, I don't just mean like they describe a nasty thing. What I mean is sometimes you're
Oh
dealing
yeah,
with like,
Elroy, he doesn't
yeah,
hold back.
yeah. But they are, and this is a comparison to Lansdale, is that they do not feel they're profoundly moral books. Like I think, and he's very clear about that. Like a lot of them, it is basically that, and it's what we kind of talked about. It is the idea that there are often lots of suffering for those who wish to do good, failure even, but there is just a integrity involved, and sometimes eventually you get a bit of success. Um, and yeah, I think the film LA Confidential gets a bit of that down quite well, obviously with what happens to certain characters in it. And the books are similar. So yeah, I'd read the Black Dahlia if I were you, and the Big Nowhere. Um, I enjoyed them both. I think LA Confidential was the best of the three I've finished so far.
Yeah, I really liked L.A. Confidential. I'm one of the things I liked about the movies. They managed to condense a lot of the because James Ellroy likes to go off on tangents.
Yeah,
They
yeah, yeah,
managed to condense it a lot. So yeah.
yeah. I think that yeah, and there are a couple of things you end up like. I would say the complete loss of the Disney plot did not hurt the film. For the gentle viewer, there is a plot in LA Confidential involving fantasy Disney, like alternative Disney, except they're all even more potentially degenerate than anyone in the actual Disney family was. I think that's a fair description. Britton can correct me.
Yeah,
But
Elroy's not a
yeah,
romantic.
no, he's moral, but he's not a romantic. He's just like yeah, but yeah, the film is just like yeah, we're not doing that. Not just for the controversy, but just because it's almost irrelevant to the actual plot of the book. Like it just ends up being just this weird thing that pops up
Hmm.
at random points in the book. And you realize that, and that's the thing where Elroy just came up with another plot. He just loves throwing plots at the wall, and he's spinning all the plates, and then eventually he finishes and he pulls it off. You know, he's good, but like it's not. Yeah. Um, the other thing that I think, though, that good in the books, but is objectively superior about the films in terms of as a decision, is James Cromwell as Harvey Smith.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Just because that's a kind of career performance, isn't it? You know, just getting down the essence of this character. Absolutely love him in that film, and I think adds a lot. And also, the whole cast. The whole cast is great. It's an incredibly well cast film. Guy Pearce and Russell Crowe making their American breakthrough. Kevin Spacey is the big name who comes over and does a very different role actually to a lot of his roles. Straight out of The Usual Suspects and Seven. He
Hmm.
does a very different kind of role to what people know him for. And American Beauty comes afterwards, which is frankly quite similar to Seven and Usual Suspects in terms of a lot of the stuff going on in it. Whereas he's a very different kind of character, very like in LA Confidential. So yeah, just magnificent film. And yeah, I'll review the whole quartet of books sometime soon because I'll finish White Jazz and I'll talk about it then in
I
more
also
detail.
see you like D&D, and you even had
Mm,
I gave you the link for this episode yesterday, and you were running a D and
mm,
D show. Um,
yes, so I was
so
live
are
streaming, wasn't I?
so are you one of those people who's because I saw you're playing like 2e, I think, like D&D. So
Yeah,
are you one of those
I
people
thought
who's
AD&D second edition. Yeah.
so are you one of those people who's grumpy about 5e D&D and like Critical Role and all that, or are you just like eh?
Um, I'm not grumpy about Critical Role. I don't watch Critical Role. I've watched a bit of it. And I think there's a load of stuff you could say about it. You know, you could be like, these are the strengths of this, these are the weaknesses, this is what's happened over time. Like, and that can be interesting, but I don't really care. It's not what I'm interested in or I'm doing. Um, and you know, the point I was making about with Bill Mollison, you know, it's good to come back with something positive rather than
Uh
just
huh.
like these are the things I don't like. I think I ended up having played a bunch of fifth edition, I ended up just clocking that. I think you know that this is not of great interest to many people, I'm sure, but I think the system is very limited. It has a lot of things that it doesn't do well. It does some stuff seriously, but it's not the stuff I'm as turned on about. And so, if I am I grumpy about 5e or Wizards of the Coast sometimes, but not because I resent people playing a game or enjoying it. I'm like, yeah, the most important thing is to sit down with your friends and play a
Well,
game.
that's
That
good.
sounds good to me. Yeah,
Because I've
um,
had some friends, like my friend
yeah,
Jason, and well, I'm not
yeah,
really friends with Alan from Alexandria, but I know Alan's kind of grumpy about D&D being popular.
yeah. Uh, it is not as popular as it was in the 80s. It might have more. It probably has more cachet. Like the triumph of the nerd has led to people adopting nerd clothes. This is what sometimes people resent. Um, grumpy guys in their 40s. That's what they're resenting. Is people getting stolen valor for being a nerd when we suffered for it in the trenches. I'm not in my 40s yet, but like we suffered for it in the trenches for you kids. Um, so I get that. I just can't be bothered. I don't care. Like leave me alone. But I, yeah, I think there's the actual top level of sales D&D has ever had. I still think is the case is the early 80s. So the widest kind of real reach it had was the 80s. I think at this point, what you see instead is like a fairly plastic reach. And Critical Role is part of that. Without criticizing Critical Role, lots of people engage with that as a lifestyle thing. Like they watch stuff and they own dice and they have a T-shirt, but they don't play D&D, and they're not heavily excited or engaged in that side of it. They don't really care. It's more that it's another part of the meta
Well, I
culture
mean,
they enjoy.
I really like, I mean, I really like the role playing aspect of D
Yeah,
and
yeah,
D more than like the rules and all that. I don't know if you feel the same way. I mean, I haven't watched your
Yeah.
D&D streams, unfortunately. I've just watched your like
No, don't worry
reviews
about
and
it.
stuff.
No, don't worry about it. No, I mean, I like rules. I like it as a game, and there's a thing here that sometimes you realize you think you're arguing
It's
with
funny.
someone.
I
I'm
don't like the rules very
Yeah,
much.
yeah. But you know how you sometimes think you're arguing with someone because you're like, you look, this is what's way better, and you realize you're kind of talking at cross purposes because you want different things.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine saying like, "Oh no, but we really need to go over there," and someone's like, "Yeah, but the Spitfire was the best plane of World War II or something," and someone's like, "What on earth are you talking about?" No, the Sherman was the most produced tank, and you're like, "You're talking about different things. Just they're not the
Mm-hmm.
conversation is not the same thing." And I think sometimes with games, and I'm thinking RPGs because RPGs confuse people. If you're playing a straight board game, you play Carcassonne, you know it's got rules, you're putting down tiles, you're scoring points. But D&D is so many things to different people that it is easy to be like, oh, this is the one true way. And in a way, I'd say, look, the best version of D&D as a game is this. But then if someone's like, oh, but what I enjoy doing is this, I'm like, fine, go and do that. What we need to recognize though is they're different things or slightly different things, and a lot of pain and anguish will be saved, I think, in the D&D community is if people just understood the different things they enjoy rather than being stressed about like someone else doing something different. Go and build the thing you want to do and enjoy it and understand what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of because I tend to be suspicious of popular things,
Yeah.
yeah, but I like Saga and Star
Mm.
Wars, so I'm not averse to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Um,
People things are usually popular for a good reason. Anything that is very popular, um, either fulfill some basic need people feel, even if it's bad for them. That's heroin, right? Uh, or it's good. And so, if something's popular, I assume it has something of value. I do not always read or watch popular things or whatever, but I'm sure most of them are worthwhile in some way.
I was gonna mention I did watch the Critical Role show, The Legend of
Mm.
Vox Machina, which
Yeah,
I
I
thought was
watched.
great. So I'm like,
We've watched a season and a half of it. I thought it was okay. Yeah, they're very talented people, and I think they're a lightning rod for people who want to be snotty, whether they are like old school people who are just snotty about the new stuff, or people who are like who want to have a countercultural opinion within modern D&D. I'm there also is people resent people making money, and the critical role people make money. People kind of resent anything that gets too popular, and it's very popular. I thought it's fine. The first season of the actual stream of them playing had a lot of very nice things. It was based on a real thing they did together. It was something they enjoyed as friends, and they're still enjoying their time together as friends. Great, I'm all for that. And the cartoon was a fun, if not great, adaptation. I enjoyed it. You know, I wouldn't watch it again, but
oh man, I thought it was
uh,
great. But oh well.
yeah, no, good.
I don't know. It was just like yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. But
Yeah,
going back to D&D, um,
yeah,
it's always interesting meeting people who like D&D. I'm actually playing a game right now with some people. Um, we've been going on for almost 4 years now. It's crazy.
nice, nice.
The Mist of Akuma in the Mist of Akuma setting. So yeah.
Not one I know. No. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that's one thing, by the way, longevity in terms of the biggest tip I'd give about D&D really is, or kind of, it kind of could be any role playing game, but I think D&D has proven itself for various reasons to be the best for this. But the best thing about D&D is not just like the one cool story you have or the one experience, but is building something with your friends over many years that is based on just the stuff that happens every week or every month, however often you play, whatever it is. And you just slowly build up stuff, and then you're like, yeah, we've been doing this for ages, and this is our story that we've made together. This
Mm-hmm.
is the world that we've made together. Not we've all written 20 pages of backstory and then we sit down and then we play 2 sessions and then we stop, but like we all just play. And that's just play, just play. Very good philosophy of D&D is just play.
Yeah.
And so yeah, 4 years. That's absolute praise to you and your group. My longest current campaign is 5.5 years old.
Holy shit.
Um, so similar kind of age to yours, and that's great. Like the the players have multiple characters. They're spread all over the world. They're all doing different things, and that started from just playing in a game store and being, just starting with some characters and just playing.
Though I
Uh,
suppose the downside of that is a lot of the people I'm playing with are a bit older, so they have like some medical problems.
mhm,
So
yeah,
that's always kind of
yeah. Oh, they're more like my age, are they? They're well into
no.
their
I think they might be older than
senescence.
you.
I'm sure they are. Yeah.
um,
Um,
they're
yeah.
lovely people though. Though
Yeah.
I'll admit, I hope he doesn't watch this. I doubt he will because my friend who's the DM is a little sensitive about well, I mean, not crit. He's fine, if people aren't. I was just I guess I'll just get to the point. I was starting to kind of feel burned out with it. I don't know if that's ever happened to
Mm.
you, but I've just you're playing the
Yeah. You can hit. You
same.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think it kind of depends. Yeah, one, you can be burnt out with anything because lots of stuff in your life can make you burnt out with stuff. It's not always the thing itself that is burning you out. It can just be you're like, oh, I don't have headspace. It could also be that with D&D is that I think the best thing about D&D as I see it and understand it is how much it keeps generating stuff that's interesting internally. A bit like plot, Plot is not something you write beforehand and force on the players. It's something that internally emerges from the things in the world. And it can be that just for various reasons that runs a bit dry and you feel a bit like, okay, now we're just going on to the next thing we need to do. This is the next thing. Okay. And that can become quite wearing. I think people can become quite bored of that. And you want to have enough organic stuff going on in your campaign. That's just natural part of the world that there's always opportunities. Players are going and they're like building a castle, or they're taking part in political intrigue, or they've heard about a portal to a different plane and they're going to go on an adventure there. That's much more challenging and dangerous. So there's different things all the time that are constantly twisting the format of it. So I think that, yeah, that helps keep it fresh. And I'm not obviously commenting at all on your game, which is, as I say, wonderful to it's gone so long. But that it can be that just there's a point where it gets a bit quiet and you just need to push through and get to what are the next fun things going on.
yeah, it's possible.
I've definitely had that where you are like, okay, we just need to get, yeah, I get that.
No, it's yeah. I mean, another thing you do, I've noticed, which was kind of funny. It was actually in February. I put out my or no, it was last
Mm,
month. I put out my February what I read during the month because I like to do those
yeah,
to keep up. I'm like,
yeah,
I kind of made a joke that was based on the Wasteland.
yeah,
Um, and then you swoop in and you're like, speaking of that, here's a video I did
yeah,
covering a T.S. Eliot poem.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no poems of the week. I'm actually due. I need to. I'm back. I'm behind one actually, just because I haven't had the time. But yeah, no, the poems of the week again are one of those niche products that not many people are going to watch comparatively. But I like making them. I think it's worth doing. It's something which is just a different
Did you get
thing,
it from Liam? Is that it? Because he does a similar thing on his channel.
No, he does. So I was very aware of his, and I've watched several of his poem readings and stuff. But no, it wasn't from that. It was I'm trying to think exactly where it was because I was reading. I was on my Substack. I was writing about poems, and I was like, I would like some format to talk more structurally and technically and less thematically, because that's the thing is that like the Substack tends to be a thematic discussion about lots of things. And so I was like, oh, maybe I could do something. And then just close reading as a technique is something I, find useful and helpful. And there are some other channels that do it on YouTube. So yeah, in a sense, Liam beat me to it, but no, it wasn't directly from that. It was kind of from this other place. But it's fun. I like getting down and just kind of going through and getting a lot of my thoughts out on these things, which otherwise I'm only talking about with one or two people ever. And it's nice to expand that to 15 or 20 people instead, even though that's a really valuable audience for me.
Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with poetry because it's like I
Mm,
don't usually read it, but like I like
mm,
listening to it be read.
mm.
You know,
Yeah, no, I
and
can
there's
see
some I
that.
like.
Yeah.
I like the Wasteland and
Mm.
Child Roland to the Dark Tower came and
Very good poem. Yeah. Well, hey,
um
on the note of which, the Dark Tower by Stephen King, of course, is about Roland going to the Dark Tower.
um
But yeah,
yeah, I need to read because there was a few years ago I went on a massive like Stephen King bender, which I
yeah,
mean that's kind of funny because he was a drug addict. But anyway, I
yeah.
digress. And
Yeah,
I read the Dark Tower series. I want to read it again because I haven't read it in a
yeah.
while. But I remember it being one of the weirdest out there series you'll meet. You'll come across.
No, I love it. I am maybe it's like maybe it's like me defending Batman versus Superman, but it's less controversial perhaps. But I actually really like the ending. I think book 6 drags quite badly, but in terms of the last kind of 3, which tend to be the most controversial, I liked book 5. I like book 7. I liked the Dark Tower a lot. One of my favorite series. I don't know if it makes a top 10 series list. I've never made one actually. I should do at some point, make a top 10 series. But yeah, I definitely say it's up there for me, and it is weird, and it is sometimes confusing because you're like, I don't really get what's going on or why this happens, and it's very Stephen King, and Stephen King is always weird anyway. But I haven't read loads of King comparative. I've read some of his fantasy, some of his short stories, but not loads of stuff by him. But yeah, I definitely recommend at least The Gunslinger to people because it is not that long. It's 230 pages or something like that. Um, and you can just sit down and be like, yeah, I'll just read this in whatever your speed is, but a couple of weeks or something, for most people. And if you like it, keep reading. If you don't, you saved yourself ever having to think about it again. you know, um, yeah, it's a book. I also really like the graphic novels for it by Peter David. I think it is. Is it Peter David who wrote them? But yeah, there's some very good prequel graphic novels.
Yeah, I feel weird about tie-ins, so I haven't read them.
No, they were like plotted by King. That's obviously equally controversial. You get that. Obviously, Joss Whedon ended up being like, all my shows have official sequels in the comics. And for Firefly, I'm like, great, because there's so much there wasn't that much Firefly and Serenity. It's like, oh yeah, I enjoy reading this. But of course, you still end up being like, is this really the same thing? Especially when he's like, oh, I've written like 2 issues of it and I'm never going to write it again. So yeah, it kind of depends. I think it depends. The more an author owns the stuff that is the tie-in, the better. Do you know what I mean? Like the more it is
Mm-hmm.
by them, the better. Whereas so DC animated universe, obviously Paul Dini and Bruce Timm like did introduce stories from the comics into the show. So Mad Love, the
Mm-hmm.
backstory of Harley Quinn, is a comic first. And there's an ambiguous way in which they're like, we generally saw the comics because we oversaw the plots and we wrote some of them. We saw them as canon unless they were disproven by the show. But that which is fine. That's good. But it definitely is a kind of dynamic in it that you're like, how much is this stuff canon? I love the DC animated universe comics, but you are like, how does it fit?
But going
Yeah.
back to poetry, there's some I
Mm,
really enjoy. I really enjoy like William Blake. I also really enjoy him as an
mm,
illustrator. But I do
yeah.
like his poetry.
Visionary. Yeah.
And I
Mm,
like Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson.
yep. We are not that force that once we were.
Mm,
That which we are, we are.
mm-hmm.
Great poem. One of my favourites. I have not read Ulysses by James Joyce, but maybe one
I
day.
actually had it on my wall over there. I would look at it, but my mom took it down because she's a meanie. I'm kidding. My mom's great,
Yeah.
but yeah, she took it down. I would like that copy back, Mom, if you watch this.
Yeah.
Uh,
give me my Ulysses. But no, yes, I'd certainly recommend Ulysses by Tennyson. I like a lot of Tennyson. Browning, you've mentioned with Childe Roland.
heard
Matthew
he's.
Arnold can be pretty good.
I thought it was kind of hilarious.
Wordsworth.
I remember I read this literary study about Eminem. I know they've
Uh-huh.
done it,
Yeah.
and
Well,
they
Harry
compared him,
Potter and Taylor Swift as well.
and they compared him to Robert Browning. So I thought that was fascinating. I'm
Mm.
like, ooh, a 19th
There,
century British Eminem. I gotta
yeah,
read this.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
probably
There's
not.
a there's there's a great. It's a parody song, I guess, but a British comedian, singing comedian, like Weird Al Yankovic kind of thing, called Mitch Benn, who wrote a song where he was like saying, I think someone said, "Oh, if Shakespeare was writing today, he'd be writing soap operas." And he was like, no, he wouldn't. Like, that's ridiculous. And I think it is because the idea he wrote popular plays, that's like soap operas. It's like, no, he'd be writing, basically says he's got this dark imagination, this talent for rhyme. And he's like, basically, he'd be writing Eminem. And I don't think Eminem is on the same level as Shakespeare, but I thought there's a valid comparison of like, actually, yeah, you can sometimes see these things where you're like really, really interesting and talented singers or writers or whatever. They might not be the same or as good as no one's as good as Shakespeare, but you can definitely be like, yeah, these aren't just some weird modern people who have no
No, it
connection
was
to
a
the literary
study about
tradition.
the
They,
song
yeah,
"Stan" from Eminem. That's what it
yeah.
was.
I know Stan is a really good example. Yeah, Stan is a profoundly poetic, heavily structured, quite thoughtful song. It's you don't need to like the genre. You can hate the genre, but like it's not. Yeah,
Well, I
it
really
is
like hip
part of a
hop,
literary
so I
tradition.
really
Yeah,
so I love the
yeah,
genre. So
yeah. Well, and certainly some of Eminem's songs, definitely for Browning, the comparison, Browning doing the kind of authorial voice, the dramatic monologue, like My Last Duchess, but he's talking about, oh, there's the painting of My Last Duchess, and then it turns out, obviously, pretty clearly, he's murdered his last wife. Um, so
well,
this dramatic monologue
I've heard they have a
definitely is the thing.
similar like dark humor
Yeah,
in their work.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, certainly there can be that. And I think Stan, it seems like a good example of that way that Marshall Mathers can adopt a voice really ably. So yeah, it's a good comparison. It's not like I'm therefore as invested in Eminem as I am in classical poetry, but like you could
Well,
everything exists in a continuum. It's not like you can just separate it. Again, classic. Why do we read classics? Partly to understand what's happened since. Why do we study history? Partly to understand what's happened since.
yeah,
Because it
it's.
all exists in a continuum.
I mean, I also like the Wasteland because it's just a weird acid trip of a.
Yeah,
But yeah, I've seen you've done some. Oh yeah, you came you swooped in and was like, speaking of some Elliot, you should check out my video.
yeah. No, I talked about his landscapes, which are short poems. They're quite easy to read, quite easy to understand in lots of ways. And I did some close readings of them. My favourite Eliot is actually the four quartets, which is like in musical terms. I mean, one they are literally the four quartets are named for a musical form. But his career has most famously it has Proof Rock and Gerontian, and then The Wasteland, which are these increasingly angsty poems about what's going on. Civilization seems to be disintegrating, like moral certainty is fading. And then he works out a lot of the stuff until eventually you start to see the four quartets are him beginning to resolve this theme. And the four quartets are just beautiful, massive, complicated. They're not in terms they're not the longest poems ever. They're like 40 pages total, but they are like him partly answering stuff what he's anxious about in the wasteland, and he's weird, this weird stuff, and then he kind of sets up these dramatic scenes at different places in England or New England, and just kind of works that stuff out. Uh, to which, yeah, I just love. I think Eliot is he's innovative but not in a way that he explodes everything before. He takes what goes before and reformulates it. The Wastelands that he does that, it's got like musical lyrics in it. It's got classical references. It's
It
got
made
all kinds of poetic
I'm
devices. Yeah,
shocked that Cats, the musical
mm.
Cats,
It's
was
based
based
on
on
Eliot.
his
Yeah,
poem.
yeah. I'm not sure if T.S. Eliot would have enjoyed watching Cats.
I don't know if you.
This is a bit like
Only
imagine
saw
saying Tolkien, "Do you want to
clips.
watch The Rings of Power?"
Only
The
saw
Rings, yeah,
clips. Only saw clips
yeah,
from the recent movie, and that was all I needed to
yeah.
know to stay away from it.
No, no. I mean, there's some perfectly reasonable music in the musical. By that I mean like tunes and stuff. But no, it's nothing special. If you're into musicals, there are much better places to go for musical. But yeah, Eliot would have. I think he would have thought it was funny. He would have seen the irony of him adapting musical lyrics and rhythms, and then like the musical adapting his his works into this weird epic about cats.
Yeah.
I think he would have thought that was funny, but he
No.
also would have hated it. I think he would have been like, "No, this is dreadful."
Oh man. Well, I mean, man, I always hate to do this, but well, you did say you need to go, so I have really enjoyed this though.
No, good. Thank you,
This has
Britton.
been
It's
a
been
very
it's been good
vigorous
fun.
discussion, as they say,
Lots of topics, covered a lot of ground.
which are my favorite kinds of discussions.
Yeah. No, what's the point in filling space? But no, thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about something again at some point in the future.
As I like to do before I finish these, if there's any social media or anything you want to share, feel free.
Yeah. So, well, just my YouTube channel is the most relevant, isn't it? Owen Edwards book reviews, very easy to find. I mean, yeah, my name is on the screen, so search for that. And if you're interested in classics, sci-fi, fantasy, or D&D, or poetry, as Britton has pointed out, then you may find something there to like. But yeah, hopefully see some people there. And yeah, I certainly yeah, we'll have to do this again sometime.
All right. Again, thank you, Owen, for giving
No,
so much of your time. Again, we should do this again at some point. I
No,
enjoyed this.
absolutely.
Well,
No,
until next
great.
time, ladies and gentlemen, bid you
Bye
adieu.
bye.